think we're about ready to start. I'm leaning a bit here. It's been nice to put some faces to names that I didn't know already in here, but I'm Alison Eales, I'm from QA Scotland. Most of you will have had some level of communication with me over the last few weeks. Welcome to this event. We're here until we've got our main event until 4 o'clock, and then afterwards Civitas Learning are doing an additional executive briefing on learning analytics, which we hope you can stay for as well. I want to thank all of you for making the time to attend today. This came out of an interest from SHECC, the Scottish Higher Education Enhancement Committee, initially around learning analytics. Obviously, over the last year, with the publication of the Green Paper, things have exploded in the area of how institutions use data to enhance learning and teaching. So what we're hoping for today is for each of you to be able to take back to your institutions something you didn't already know about the field of learning analytics in particular, in relation to how you might be able to use these advancements in enhancing learning and teaching in your own institutions. I'm going to hand over to Dragan Gasovic from the University of Edinburgh, and before I do so I would just like to thank the University of Edinburgh for coordinating the venue and the facilities and the catering today. This has been extremely generous, and we're very helpful. We're very grateful, so thank you. Anyways, Dragan.
It's my pleasure. Welcome everybody. My name is Dragan Gasovic. I'm professor and chair in learning analytics here at the University of Edinburgh. I joined only 16 months ago to this university and been quite fortunate to work with a great group of people who are here at the University of Edinburgh. Many of you probably are familiar. Last week we hosted the main learning analytics event, which is the Learning Analytics and Knowledge Conference. It was a huge success. We broke all the possible records. But then one question emerges, can we do learning analytics in kilts? And I think we can, and part of the reason is why we are having this event today is to organize. Part of the story as well is that while we actually did a lot of research in different parts of the world in terms of learning adoption and implementation, we also found before we can really do anything serious in higher education, we need to develop strategic capability of our institutions, right? And I think this is the great group of people to start actually developing this strategic capability in Scotland, and we can also start sharing and also at the same time building this joint understanding. So we've been quite fortunate to have a great lineup of speakers. I'm going to introduce all of them. I'm going to also announce a few housekeeping information. One housekeeping information is that all the sessions today will be streamed and recorded. Recordings will be available on YouTube. So if any of the speakers have any issues with them, please do let us know, or don't speak something you would speak otherwise. The other thing is, if anybody needs toilets are, if you exit this door there on your left, and then first door on the left, they will lead you to toilets. Without any further, I'm going to also ask Professor Charles Jeffrey, the Senior Vice Principal at the University of Edinburgh, to give a welcome.
Thank you, Dragan and Alison. Great to be hosting this event with QAA SHECC on such an important topic. Great to see colleagues from across Scotland here, but also internationally. As many of you will know, the world descended upon Edinburgh over the last little while to engage in two of the major conferences around e-learning pedagogy and e-learning technology. They came here in part, I think, because we've built something of a reputation in this field through the work of people like Dragan and Jeff Haywood, in part because it's a theme of the time. Technology is transforming pretty much everything that happens in universities, and it's absolutely central for all of us to understand how that changes how we teach and how students learn, what technologies we need to make that interaction of learning and teaching as successful as it can be. And in that respect, it's also great to have, as part of the event today, a number of technology providers who may be in some senses in competition with each other to try and vend their wares, but they're also partners in what's really an exploration of how learning, teaching and technology are being transformed, and helping us to think a little bit about where that transformation might be in 10 years or so we can begin to steer more effectively in that direction. So a great group of people. Congratulations, Alison and Dragan, for pulling us together, and I'm looking forward to it very much.
Thanks very much, Charlie. In terms of program, I'm sure you all had a chance to see the program for today. In the first session, which will go for about an hour and 45 minutes, we'll have 3 excellent keynote speakers. And then in the afternoon session, we decided to have an industry panel where representatives of 3 major players in the field of learning analytics will be discussing different issues that are related to learning analytics, some of their experience, but at the same time also to give you a kind of a broad overview of the options that are available in terms of engagement and possibilities for your institutions to engage with some of these potential partners. So then let's start with our program. Our first speaker is George Siemens, great, well-known person in the area of MOOCs. Many of you probably know some of his work in MOOCs. He is the person who taught the first MOOC in 2008 with another fellow Canadian who was basically teaching a course on connectivism. Later, George basically moved to Athabasca University, where I was also as well, and he had this idea in 2010, why don't we actually start a new conference? And George approached me in June 2010 and asked, Dragan, can we organize a conference in September? I said, no. But then I managed to convince George that we move that conference to late February, early March, and to start basically in 2011. But you can imagine, we organized the first conference in Banff, Alberta. February meant minus 35. But also meant a huge, basically, presence of participants in the conference as well. Whoever signed up for the conference, they were there. George was also the first president of the Society for Learning Analytics Research, and also is making a great impact for the formation of this field, and also his leadership in a way showed us the extent to which we can build a new field around policies and the big research agenda rather than just around individual personalities. George.
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to spend some time with you here today. I just want to give a quick shout out to a number of colleagues. Certainly, Dragan, who I'm sure many of you are aware is one of my partners in crime in getting things rolling with the Learning Analytics Conference, as well as the Society for Learning Analytics Research, which he's currently leading. And a good colleague and friend, Ryan Baker, who started the educational data mining community several years before we were involved. And it's also great to see some contacts here. I know, John and Shadi from D2L and Blackboard that have been very generous supporters of the learning analytics community, and great to see a few other colleagues, Neil and Mark and others here. So it's a privilege to spend some time talking to you about learning analytics. So what I want to do is look at it really from so Dragan asked me just to sort of do a sort of a quick overview and talk a little bit about some of the policy and related concerns. So that's essentially what I'll be doing in my talk here, is what learning analytics are. I'm going to start by basically running through 3 quick things. So I want to talk a little bit about where I'm coming from, my perspective, and then from some of the definitions, if you will, of learning analytics, and ultimately what that actually looks like, what the implications of that are in terms of strategy. So first of all, I'm with Link Research Lab, which is at University of Texas at Arlington. We're a lab now that's, I think we've got 22 students, researchers, staff affiliated with it, and several academic positions that'll be developed over the next year or so. And most of our research is focused on this one defining question, which is, what does it mean to be human in a digital age? So as was noted earlier, there's this tremendous transition into everything is technologically enabled. And as you move into digital setting, you create data trails. And as you create data trails, you create the foundation for analytics. But very much it's an interesting time of transition where the ideas that we've come accustomed to in a classroom, some of the egalitarian and related perspectives, may not transition well into online environments. And so it's a contested space in terms of, will the traditional ideals of a university and higher education translate well into a digital environment that's controlled, regulated, and extensively monitored? So it's a significant question to look at. So that's our broad overview, is what does it mean to be human in digital age? We focus on it particularly from 4 different perspectives. The first one, we look at how is knowledge created and shared in a digital environment. Then we look at what's work going to look like tomorrow. How are we going to engage in work when we're hearing everything's going to be automated and that the robots are taking over? And it's not just they're taking over physical work, they're actually taking over cognitive work. We're the last generation that's going to be smarter than the technologies that we use. And that transition will happen in our lifetime. In many cases, it has already. We're also interested in what does it take for all students to succeed? So this is an important question for us. So at the University of Texas at Arlington, we're the 5th most diverse campus in the U.S., which means if you look at College Scoreboard, it'll list different profile and makeup of university systems. So we very much look like the rest of the campuses, with the exception of your top systems are going to look like in the future in the U.S. And that means that we have a lot of students who come at us from an underrepresented perspective, first and family degree, low income, and so on. And so we need to be able to not just move them along to graduate, but to give them the skills to compete in whatever the economy is. And then, of course, the bigger perspective for us relating back to what does it mean to be human in a digital age relates to how are we going to learn tomorrow and what's that going to look like. So, short statement here is if you want to know what universities are going to look like tomorrow, you basically have to understand information today. And that's been a traditional type of trajectory. It goes back, thousands and thousands of years, but traditionally society has created institutions that reflect what it does with knowledge. McNeely and Wolverton wrote a great text on this called Reinventing Knowledge, and they looked at the idea of how, with the development of philosophical spaces and schools of thought, the development of the Lyceum, eventually the library, or the Gutenberg library classification system, Linnaean taxonomy, and the list goes on. What we do with information determines the kinds of institutions that we create. And so the institutions that we need to prepare ourselves for and our students for are essentially ones that reflect some of these attributes, that reflect open, distributed, networked types of information, things that are social, scalable at a level that we've just never imagined in the past, and something that has greater attention to self-organizing and adaptive attributes on the part of individual students. Something that our system right now isn't well equipped for. We're still seeing our university system as a point A to point B kind of a thing, where we take a student as a raw product. We don't really care what they know. We just care what our curriculum is, and we push them through our curriculum. And they're transformed through that process. So what we essentially want to change, and I'll address this toward the end, is this idea of moving to computed curriculum, that we generate our learning and curriculum in real time based on the needs of individual students. Now, this is vastly oversimplified, but I'm just trying to get at this idea a little bit more of how knowledge and knowledge interaction is changing. And so this is a very traditionalist type of model. We have the faculty who knows, we have the content that needs to be known, and then we have the student that we want to teach. And we do things to the student in order to get them more capable and competent. Well, the internet has certainly changed a lot of those elements in that it's given a new degree of control to end users, meaning that there's through the adoption of technology, through the utilization of digital and network resources, one of the fundamental things that happens, there's been a power shift. Now, these power shifts are short-term. They consolidate and new power structures are created. If you recall, those of you that were active at one point, we were calling it Web 2.0, 2004, 2005. Web 2.0 was going to be the great achievement of Tim Berners-Lee's vision of a read-write web type of an environment. It was going to give power to the people, and instead what we had as an outcome is we have everything that we used to have in regular media now evident on social media, heavy advertising, its influence, and what we've actually found is we lost a lot more power because now algorithms and subtle nudging and shaping of messages occurs in digital spaces. So we are at that point now with a transitory power system, but there are enough concerns that I have around how some folks view the education system as one of primarily having students memorize what's already known in a space rather than being novel knowledge creators, even at a young age. If you look at the work of Carl Breider, Marlene Scardameli out of University of Toronto, children as young as primary school level should be offering hypothesis. They should be creating research approaches to discovering new things. They should be knowledge creators, not knowledge consumers. And so I think we're at a very unique time where the opportunity is there, but we could very much end up doing what happened with Web 2.0, which is the promise of liberation is fiddled away because we fail to have a compelling vision, and instead a lot of the other organizations that have a particular motive, whatever that might be, it could be due to ideologies, it could be to profit, it could be for whatever reason, that they'll come in and take over that landscape. So that's background. Knowledge processes are changing. It'll map to the future of universities going forward. We have an interesting time to be autonomous, active agents in shaping that future. All right, so learning analytics, we've had a number of definitions. This is the one we used at our first conference. It's probably the crappiest definition ever made. It's one of those things where I still don't know what the hell it is, and I've been saying it for 6 years. But basically, the short version of it, if you'd like, is that we just want to use data to improve learner performance. Now that data could be related to what happens, as a student moves through the course. It could be data that we get from students before they even enroll in the university system. It could be data that exists within our learning management system. It could be something that exists within social media. Basically, anything that relates to the student is what we want to use in order to improve their learner performance. There's a large number of ethics and privacy issues that are just starting to be surfaced, and a lot of individuals are paying more attention to it. But we just want to recognize that there are things happening with our students that we're not catching. I mean, if you have a one-to-one relationship with a student, or if you have 6 students, you really don't need learning analytics because you know facial expressions, you know the minute details. But the nature of university systems today, where we have students moving disconnected from one class to another, where the one prof doesn't know what happened with another prof, there's so much happening there that we just don't understand. Where are their points of failing, what are their emotional state, what did they learn in the last class, what should they be learning now? There's all kinds of challenges that arise from that. So it's the disconnected and large scale of student population that requires us to turn to learning analytics so that we can provide an additional level of support. Whereas Mark sometimes statements that he uses, we need to turn the light on so we can see what's there. Now there's 2 dimensions here I just want to emphasize. So on the one hand, there's analytics that focuses on improving the academic system. Now that's basically business intelligence. So I don't classify that as learning analytics. So that might be things like allocating classroom space, using ways of doing a better job of energy allocation or whatever else. So that's business intelligence applied to the educational process. Not learning analytics. I think EDUCAUSE uses the term academic analytics. But basically, from a focus of analytics, I'm trying to look at some perspective where you have the faculty, the learner, the institution, individuals involved. That's essentially where learning analytics exists, and it can be anything from course level through eventually to international, trying to create world-class universities. And I'll address that a little bit, I think I showed my last slide when I talk about some work being done at the University of Texas Arlington campus with a new initiative that's led by a colleague, Pete Smith. So what will learning analytics do to education, or what's the value of it ultimately? I think it has a number of very promising potentials. I think the first one, which certainly Dragan and Ryan and others in the room are likely interested in, is the idea of research. It will help us better understand learning, how it happens, how we can influence positively, what are the factors that cause dropout, which in turn will relate back to design systems. Are there certain points in our curriculum where when students engage it, they actually get dumber on the next assignment that they do? So it's really about trying to increase a research layer. And I think there's 2 broad elements that have the prospect of changing how we understand learning. One is the field of neuroscience. There's a lot of potential and opportunity there. Neuroscience, though, typically deals with a small but very deep N. Whereas with learning analytics, we're looking at typically huge numbers of learners, and there's a chapter that Ryan and I did in the Cambridge Handbook of Learning Analytics where we identified some of the elements that are involved when you're engaging in learning analytics. And the intent is, from a research perspective, to be able to get this mix between what does the technology do versus what does the human do. So it's getting that balance right. What do we need software to do algorithmically, and at what level do we have the software make decision-making easier for the learners? But so that's from a research perspective. I think we're going to have an opportunity to really understand a lot about the factors that are involved in learning. Now, before I say that, I'll talk about this on the next slide, but right now we don't have the data to do this very well. The data that we're looking at right now is rather shallow, and we're really beating the hell out of log data and clickstream data to try and get some insight into what's happening, and there's a lot more that's possible, and we're just at the early stages of getting that happening. A few other things, I won't go into all these in detail, but I do think eventually it will influence models of learning. I'll talk about computed curriculum in a little bit, but it's something that will change how we learn and how we engage with others, how we teach students, how we create curriculum. And another aspect, I think, is the idea of competitiveness. Top systems are going to be those that can demonstrate that they're able to use the resources that they're entrusted with, whether they're tuition fees from students or state or provincial fees from governments. If you can demonstrate you do a better job with dollars, so to speak, in helping move students to successful graduation, you'll be eventually rewarded both from students or from your funders. Now, in order, though, to get at a lot of the things that we want to do a better job of understanding, such as the social and affective dimensions of learning, moving beyond just a cognitive-only lens. As I mentioned previously, we're the last generation that's going to be smarter than our technology, and we're already losing that particular battle. So education needs to become something more than just the cognitive dimension of the learning experience. And there's some work that Ryan and Dragan and I have been working on personal learning graphs, where the focus is on trying to get at the social and affective elements, process and strategy, metacognition, and so on. So right now at UTA, one of our major initiatives is what we're calling AWARE. We have an event being held at Stanford in November on this topic, where we're looking at wearable devices that'll do everything from physiological data to breath patterns to anything that relates to skin temperature changes, states of arousal. Some of those are through wearables like the E4, the Empatica device, or it could be video device Spire, which just tracks breathing patterns. EEG, the eye motions, eye tracking, related Tobii type of product work, and if any of the large growing numbers of fitness bands that are available now. Now, it's still a little early to say exactly what the value of those things are, but what I'm anticipating, at least, we have a combination of physical activity and mindfulness practices that we're going to be running over several years starting in fall using the E4. We do expect, if the indications that other systems like Harvard Medical School and others have determined that simple physical activity with breathing and mindfulness practices reduces incidence of depression by 60 to 70%. There's some significant value in saying, what if we stop paying attention primarily to the cognitive development of students and start to broaden our focus on the overall development and well-being of individuals, paying attention to sort of the mind-body connection rather than just focus heavily on the mind. So our interest then is trying to get at whole person learning and trying to do a better job of getting at the perspective of individual well-being as a part of the education process. Now with that, though, this is something that Dragan addressed earlier, is we face a significant challenge in that there is really a lack of data-informed decision-making culture. In many cases, there's even a lack of infrastructure to do this well. Last week I was in Beijing, and I met with Tsinghua University leaders there, the top university in China, and the challenge that they face is like any other university I've chatted with over the last 5 to 6 years, which is they have a ton of data. That data is all over the place. They don't even know where it is or what shape it is in. Simple data inventory hasn't been conducted in terms of who has what kind of data, who has access to it, what's the shape of that. And so before we can even get to the point of doing anything with that data, we need that senior leadership and that visioning that's so important. In fact, I'd take it one step further and say that success with learning analytics is an organizational change strategy first, before it ever becomes a technical or an implementation strategy. And that's a critical thing to understand, because for those of you in the room here, if you're planning on allocating resources or doing deployment of new initiatives, that without attending to or paying attention to the value of organizational change and a visioning strategy, like analytics isn't like a pixie dust thing that you sprinkle on something and it comes to life. It has to fit into some kind of a broader vision for institutional change. And that's why with some of the work that a colleague, Dawson and McFadden had looked at, which is just that that kind of data aware culture doesn't exist in many university environments. So there's some discussions that Dragan and Mark and I have had about a learning analytics leadership summit in order to try and bring that conversation up to a scale where individuals feel comfortable with making decisions around it. I mean, if someone comes in and shows you an adaptive learning platform, what are your metrics for making decisions about it? Or if someone comes in and says they're going to do X, Y, and Z with your data, how do you know what you're getting out of that, and how does it compare to existing products? So there has to be, before we're buying tool sets, there needs to be some raised level of awareness on what exactly we want analytics to do within a broader organization. Another focus that's quite critical here is the idea that we need to consider more than a broad data strategy. It's worth recognizing that what's going to work with one student won't work with another student. And this is especially true. I'll take it from an American context because I have greater familiarity with the data in this area. But one of the biggest determinants in the US of academic success, whether or not you're going to get a degree, not just one, the biggest, is your income and your family's income. So it's not smarts. An interesting article on this is who gets to graduate in the New York Times. But it's not intelligence per se that's the issue here. It's just you don't have the support around being involved in intensive knowledge environments. So learning analytics, once we move beyond just teaching the mind to trying to teach the whole person, that's where I expect we're going to start to see the biggest gains in helping learners end up becoming more successful in their educational experiences. So it's really important to remember that one size doesn't fit all. And something that a colleague of ours, Phil Winnie, frequently references is, on the one hand, you're dealing with an N of million. But when it actually comes down to analytics and it comes down to an intervention, you want to get down to an N of one. You want to get down to that one student in that one context. Your 10 million student profiles do nothing for you if you don't help that one very specific student move better through a particular course she's struggling with. All right, so that's a little bit of background, just just from a learning analytics end, and what some of the activities are that are involved. I want to talk a little bit more just from a strategy lens now. And just to try and get a bit of a sense from as individuals here begin deploying or start thinking about ways to adopt analytics, what are some of the strategy and policy implications related to this? And I should check my time. I've got another 12 minutes. So most of your campuses already have analytics work happening. And this is sort of the bottom-up thing. You will have faculty that are doing some level of analysis, computer science, they've got access to their own data, they run their own LMS, whatever they do. They're doing some of this work already, and this is helpful. It helps to create a bit of a culture. I know University of Michigan did a really nice job of taking a mentorship approach where individuals who had done work with learning analytics projects were able to then take and mentor others who were just getting started. But the drawback with this, even though it's helpful, you want to start somewhere, but the drawback is that anything effective requires a systemic approach. If you're going to intervene when a student drops out, because again, if it's just one class or one faculty dealing with one group of students, you don't get the benefit of behavior in other subject areas. You often don't see the pattern of behavior that might happen completely outside of a university context. It could be university use of resources that's a factor. It could be changes in attendance in other courses. So you really, if you want to get at understanding a student as a whole, and especially if you want to start assigning resources for either human interventions or automated interventions, there needs to be the leadership end, which requires that top-down visioning that I assume many folks in this room will be engaged in. A paper I did with a colleague, Shane Dawson and Grace Lynch. A couple of years ago, we looked at what's called the Learning Analytics Maturity Model, and it's based on some of Davenport's work on just in analytics in general, but the main thing we're trying to communicate is the sophistication of university systems as they move along. Now, with University Analytics, which was an organization that was set up on campus at University of Texas Arlington, we're basing all of our university analytics work on the maturity model. And so most universities sort of sit at either the very beginning where they have some awareness of their data, they have some sense of what's going on, they might do a little bit of reporting, they may, if they're reasonably sophisticated, do some work with experimentation, simple dashboards, and so on. Very, very few universities are even at that mid-scale where you're starting to give organization students and faculty relevant resources, either teaching dashboards or we have cross-systems integration and so on. That's rare. In fact, I would say there's maybe a handful of universities that sort of sit at that mid-stage. I know certainly organizations like Civitas and others are trying to move universities further along on that pathway, but at this stage, I would still say that's the exception. I would say the bottom, aware or experimentation, is where most systems are. And when we looked at University of Texas Arlington, we really felt we were right in between the aware and the experimentation. We expect within the next 18 months we'll get into the mid-stage, and then following that we'll start to look at the idea of organizational transformation, where we start looking at different teaching models, developing reasonably sophisticated predictive models for individual students, and to start look at measuring the, basically doing analytics on our analytics interventions. In the long run, there is certainly the opportunity for systemic transformation, sector-wide transformation, and that was part of the intent with this report, where we're looking at, in Australia's context, this was a report we developed for the Australian government, where we were looking at what would need to happen for Australia to be a world leader in analytics, and how would the use of analytics benefit them from a competitive strategy. So the other questions, things very briefly, I'm just going to show a few quick images at you, and if anybody wants the slides, then just let me know. But basically, you're looking at your data sources. These are growing rapidly. One of the things that we're looking at on campus is this idea of ambient or computing, using, I guess, the idea of Internet of Things, for lack of a better word, where we're focused on beacons and iBeacons and other tool sets to try and collect student movement data to basically make the learning environment intelligent at some level. And I already mentioned wearables, which is our biggest push right now. In fact, that's our primary focus, is around broadening data collection from students. But it could be anything from learning management system data to social media, student success systems, whatever else that's involved. Some view of data repositories. I should mention, I'll get to this in my last slide, but most of these are not being, universities aren't doing these things entirely on their own. In fact, at almost every successful implementation I've seen so far is there are a series of technology partners that are involved in this, whether those technology partners are an LMS, or whether it's an enabling organization like Civitas, or whether it is some related group, SAS or so on. There's typically some larger external enabling system in making sense of that. From there, of course, it's the questions you're asking. And ultimately, really, in fairness, you start with the questions you care about, and then you build out your learning analytics infrastructure. And then you fit into either the analytics end or the academic end, because a lot of cases, the state and the reporting data flows out of your learning data as well. Now, the specific analytics loop, which apparently I heard I was criticized on the keynote speaker, but jerk. At the LAC conference, I missed learning scientists somewhere. But anyway, so basically the model here, and I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I just want to mention it's pretty straightforward, but these are I'm just trying to give you a broad overview for those of you that are leaders as you're beginning to think about what kinds of things do you have to think about and need to be able to do. So it's just the collection, acquisition, storage, cleaning, integration, and then your team, the people are going to be looking at it. It's kind of, when I was I was at Red River College in the late 90s, and we had a computer guy. And they did everything. If you had a problem with your software, with the internet, with the hardware, they did everything. But needless to say, you don't have that anymore. The skills become so specialized. So even right now, if you're lucky to have a very bright person who's capable of working with data, their skill sets, because of how quickly things are developing, is going to be obsolete. I mean, not obsolete, but you're going to need to build out a team with specialized skill sets in order to make that happen. So the programmer who can do everything, working with R and Python and stitch your data together in a meaningful way, that's a very short-lived solution. It's really about looking at teams. If you can't build the capacity internally, then connecting with a technology partner. Anyways, analytics, the representation, and ultimately for us, the big thing has to be around action. So it gets back to the idea that the intent of analytics is to help students be successful. We want more students to learn, and from the students that are already completing, we want them to complete stronger. So essentially, the analytics model is that type of a focus. Now, so to start over the next 4 or 5 slides, wrap things up, it's also about changing our perspective on what curriculum is. And I really want to emphasize the idea of computed curriculum. is this idea that curriculum isn't a pre-existing entity before our students arrive that we teach to our students. And this comes partly out of the work with Ryan and Dragon, where we're looking at personal learning graphs, which is basically an attempt to say we need to first understand our students, and then from there we can do a better job of teaching them. And so the idea of computed curriculum is something like this. So let's say you have a student's knowledge. So this is a learner. They've acquired this knowledge through either formal learning within our own university classrooms, maybe you've done it informally, maybe they've been, which coincidentally in the US, the majority student now is a non-traditional learner. Now, that has huge implications. That means that the students coming into our classrooms aren't 18 to 22, 23 years old. In fact, the fastest growing learner population is now a non-traditional student. So we need to do a better job of accounting for what the individual knows. And this is the work that we're doing at the personal learning graph, where we want to architect an understanding of what the learner knows, and then have a sense of what is the knowledge that exists within a particular discipline. Now again, this is just knowledge. We're not looking at a lot of the affective elements and the strategy elements and so on. But at a very simple level is, if we know the learner, and if we know the knowledge domain, then we can teach to fill the gaps that exist. So we might have somebody come in that says, oh, you know, we've now assessed what you know, and if you want to become a nurse or get into computer science, this is how far along you are in these areas. So we fill the gaps through this idea of computed curriculum. And that might mean that a student that would have in the past spent 4 years with us, maybe they finish in 2 years. Or somebody that would have spent 4 years maybe finishes in 5 or 6 years. But the central point to articulate here is that any student with persistence has the capability of completing based on their knowledge level. So even a group of 30 students all taking a similar course are going to proceed in a very different way, simply because we're adjusting our curricular material to the individual knowledge and attributes that those students have. This is hardly new. We were talking about this stuff in the 90s, but or even prior to that, but it's the general idea that where we're at now is we can begin doing these kinds of things at scale, something that up until recently just simply wasn't possible. And then the final slide I just want to address is one perspective for what's been deployed at UTA. A recent department, as far as I'm aware, this is still the most complete approach to data in education that I've seen emerge. And it was a colleague from the University of Texas, Pete Smith, leads this initiative. He's the chief data officer for our campus. So UTA, as I mentioned, fifth most diverse campus in the US. We've got about 50-some thousand students. Within a few years, we'll exceed our other institution down in Austin. We expect we'll exceed their student population in about 2 to 3 years. So we'll be approaching 60,000 students. And as a result of that, we have an enormous amount of data. And so the University Analytics Department was created specifically to make sense of that data at all levels. So it's a holistic, integrated access to all the data on campus kind of a department. And we've got the way it was structured, so we have representative on our regular management meetings from both LINC as the research arm, and then the University Analytics as the practice arm, so to speak. So we have tight integration when it comes to grant writing, and when it comes to deploying and evaluating. There's one project we're involved with a company called Smart Sparrow, Adaptive Analytics, where we're looking at integrated curriculum that's driven by provocative questions rather than by particular curricular focus. And so those are the kinds of things where we deploy them through University Analytics, even though they may come out of a LINC perspective. And as I mentioned, it basically has access to all the data that's involved on campus, whether it's student information system, LMS, institutional data. It serves to basically advise the president and the deans and so on in terms of what's happening and what the trends are. Now, this is still at an infrastructure build-out stage, which means that it's not 100% deployed, but eventually, and by eventually in a reasonably short time, the department itself will be approaching about 50 staff and researchers, data scientists, which, interestingly enough, for those of you that are considering a career change, you might as well just become a data scientist. We actually had to rewrite our pay scheme because we couldn't hire the data specialists that we wanted for University Analytics. So we had to go to HR and say we're not getting people, so we got approval for a special section that wasn't in the existing university agreement that allowed us to hire the kind of talent that we needed. And then another big aspect here is that we've worked with a number of enabling partners to help flesh this out. as this gets deployed, it'll be one of those examples, again, of the connection between practice and research, where one informs the other. And then certainly when you have 50,000 students with a range of interventions being utilized using wearable devices, you also have a lot of potential research opportunities. So that's a quick overview of analytics and some of the policy perspectives we're looking at. So I'll pass it to Dragan.
Thanks very much. We can take a couple of quick questions now, and also in the end of this session we have about 15 minutes for a broader discussion. So if anybody has any questions for George, please. Yes, please.
Do you think our understanding of ethics and the ethical use of data is as well developed as it needs to be for data to the next step? You mentioned a range of motives for making use of data from companies, etc. I just wondered your views on how are we ready to make use of this data in an ethical way?
Not even close. It's not even on our horizon. There's been a few articles that have been written about it, but it's kind of the example I've used in the past, which I stole from someone. But it's like if you walk by a house and you see the windows are open, it would be odd if you ran up to the window and started peeking in and looking into the window. We would think that's not appropriate behavior. It might not be illegal, but we have social norms around that kind of behavior. Whereas with data, we don't have those social norms. It's like if somebody has data, we think we can just take it. If it's open on the web, we think we can just take it and analyze it. So there are a large number of ethics questions that are required. I know there's a growing amount of researchers that are turning their attention to it. It's not a question that's unique to us, though, because when you look at it, data is basically a transactional entity. It's like money. So if I go to a restaurant and I want to buy a hamburger, if somebody says, oh, it's going to be $372, I'll probably pass, because I know the value of a burger typically isn't that. But we don't have that sense with our data exchange. We have no ground zero for what is an appropriate transaction for our data. So we give Facebook all of our data, and we're vastly overpaying for the service, but because we haven't normed a sense of data as a transactional entity, we have nothing to talk about. So unfortunately, that's where we are in education as well. I think in the future, if we have a learning graph that an individual owns, then they can go to university, and the university can say, look, we can give you personalized feedback, resources, this, that, and the other thing, if you open these elements of your data to us. And then the student can then say, oh, if I give you that, I'm going to get a predictive model back, I'm going to get personalized support, tutoring, and so on.
Any other questions? Yes, please, Sean.
When you started, you made quite a telling claim, which was that education systems should be designed around the way that information is structured. Seems to me that's a really quite a big claim. I wonder if you could say a bit more about that.
Sure.
Maybe give some examples.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And so the claim, as I mentioned, it came out of a text that McNeil and Wolverton did, where they looked at the ways that institutions traditionally had mapped information. And so and again, they traced it through to the growth of knowledge early on with the Library of Alexandria, developing the scroll system, eventually moving into the philosophical space with the Academy of the Lyceum being developed as knowledge became a philosophical entity that was debated and discussed, and so on and so on. So it's the claim is being just drawn from those instances historically where data, information more precisely, has been manipulated in a certain way which then produces different types of institutions. And so the argument then, and at some level I think we can see this emerging already with the heavy surveillance use that we see coming. As data is digital, it's transferable, it's controllable at a level that's never been controllable in the past. I think we're starting to see early stages of that. Now that doesn't mean that there's not social elements and ethical elements as part of it, but I think the broad claim was just to say the way that data flows and is being structured is already making an impact. Our classroom walls are thinning. Our students, they might watch a video on YouTube before they come to class, or they might fact check us when in the middle of a lecture, or they might just play video games while they're in class. But the idea is that the structure of data is already, and the structure of information, I should say, is already impacting our institutions. MOOCs initially were going to change the world. They didn't, but there's a number of other things, the granularization of content, changes to the course structure. And this is one of these things where you can't appeal to 10 years in the future, but I will anyway. But the impact is it'll change the structure of courses, this idea of computed curriculum. Knowing each individual student will change our teaching practices, the idea of a learner profile. And all of those, again, are driven by the fact that information has attributes, digital information has attributes that physical information doesn't have. But, I mean, this is one of those sit in a pub for a few hours and argue it over conversations.
One last question, Jeff, please.
Yeah, I mean, you said at the beginning that one of the questions is what's needed for all students to be successful, and then you said that in a one-to-one or in a one-slot group setting, you have no problem, no need for analytics. I wondered how, in your own setting in Arlington, you were dealing with the challenge of being able to gather data and analyse it and find potential actionable outcomes, but then ensuring that the faculty, all supporters, advisors, whoever, actually took that through to a successful outcome, because the analysis of the problem and the need for intervention without the intervention by informed faculty and supporters takes you nowhere.
Yeah.
Have you got an idea about how Arlington faculty and advisors will engage with this so that action is taken forward and the student maybe therefore be more successful?
At this stage, because we're still at the build out of the infrastructure end in terms of data collection and analysis, we're still early stages. We'll give you one example, though, of an initiative which we're involved with, which was a large grant that looked specifically at underrepresented populations. And it was about, there's an initiative that was created by a faculty member in the education school, and she ended up with this idea of Go Centers, which is where, in order to help the students who needed the most assistance succeed, they were physically located within a school. They had these Go Centers for support. We're recreating that sort of as a triage service within our library systems. And as a result of that library system emphasis, that's where we're going to get some of the support for enabling the teaching or the support systems around teaching. We're not at the stage where it's specifically going to target the individual faculty members where it needs to be, because when you look at it, you get your data after the course is done. It's more post-mortem sort of an activity rather than near real time. With the Go Center work, we'll get near real time because it's students presenting their challenges and their frustrations and so on. But again, it's important for me to communicate that these are, for most systems, still very early stage. There's a few for-profit systems that have been much further down on this, but bringing administrators and faculty along has proven to be perhaps the most difficult challenge. The technical stuff takes time but is doable. The social organizational culture stuff, that's where the real pain lies. All right, thanks.
Thanks very much, George. That was a great talk, George. And obviously, I think some of these questions that we had here related to analytics and privacy are actually a nice introduction into the talk that Neil Slater will give. I'm sure many of you, or if most of you don't know Neil. Neil's been quite active in digital and distance education within the UK. Many influential work he's done, but especially recently he's been focusing on learning analytics. He's affiliated now with SHECC, I think 60% of his time. And he's been leading some of the activities related to their learning analytics program, but also exploring different ethical and legal issues related to learning analytics. And also he's developed the SHECC Code of Practice for Learning Analytics. So just Neil, look forward to your talk.
Thank you, Dragan. So it's great to be here and great to see quite a few familiar faces, some I've known for many years and some just more recently in the world of learning analytics. I'm an independent consultant and I oscillate between Milton Keynes, because I used to work at the Open University, and Helensburgh. So I'm kind of mixed between two places, and I sometimes don't know which way I'm going when I'm on an aeroplane. I have to think, am I going north or south? So I'm going to talk about SHECC's Learning Analytics program, which is probably the only such program of any kind of scale in the world at the moment. I was talking to some Americans last week who are quite jealous that we're able to do this on a national scale. And I'm just kicking off with a couple of slides on some statistics. And I apologise this is English statistics rather than Scottish or UK. But you'll see similar sort of things in Scotland. So we have a lot of people failing to finish at colleges and universities. There's a high cost of that. Many students drop out in their first year of study at universities. Again, high individual cost. And students, this is an interesting one. Students with 340 UCAS points or above were considerably less likely than those with fewer UCAS points to leave their courses without their award. So that's, and a few other statistics on attainment. So that was on retention, which I know is not a particular issue at Edinburgh University, but might be at some Scottish universities represented here. Attainment is obviously an issue for everyone, something that we want to improve on. And again, in these English statistics, 70% of students reporting a parent with HE qualifications achieved an upper degree as against 64%. Who didn't have a parent. And then, you can see that in all disciplines except computer science, medicines and dentistry and physical science, students with a parent with an HE qualification were more likely to have achieved an upper degree. And then obviously there's a difference between white and BME students as well. So learning analytics gives us the potential to delve into some of this data, identify hopefully some of the reasons why these students might be failing to perform as well as other groups, and then attempt to do something about it. And importantly, evaluate whether our attempts to do something about it, take an intervention, have been successful or not. This is a useful model for looking at the maturity of universities in their adoption of learning analytics. So you can see this particular university that's profiled there has low investment. It's only just starting on the investment side. A bit of expertise. The culture's quite ready. Their processes need a bit of work. They've done a fair bit on their data reporting and tools, and they've got a lot to do still on their governance and infrastructure. Just a quick idea. That's one university that was profiled against that tool there. So just using that as a basis for some of the things JISC is doing. Looking at expertise in particular. We have a learning analytics network which met in this room last year, about a year ago I think, and meets quarterly around the UK. So this is an opportunity for people to meet each other, exchange opinions and experience in learning analytics, and attend presentations and workshops from experts in the field. And there's also an email list which you can subscribe to if you want to know what's happening with the JISC Learning Analytics programme.
Yeah. For a moment, because there's some sound coming on, so we need to turn the volume just on.
Because I wondered what that was.
Yeah, sorry.
It's you.
It's me being broadcast back.
Yes.
Feeding back.
So you're hearing all. It was like talking to myself in Australia.
Sorry.
Yeah. Thank you. So, looking at some other parts of this model, process, governance, infrastructure and culture, a lot of that is affected by ethical and legal issues, which one of our questions we just had alluded to. So we've done a lot of work in this at JISC because it was an issue that most people bring up whenever you talk about learning analytics. They say, what about the ethical issues? And they get worried about data protection as well. So we decided that was one of the first things we were going to address. I did a literature review of the ethical and legal issues of learning analytics. There are many papers written about the ethics of big data, for example, and a lot on the legal side, and a growing research base in learning analytics as well. From that, I distilled 86 different issues, legal and ethical issues. And grouped those, and just to give you an example of some of the issues that crop up, here's one which I called adverse impact of opting out on individual. So if a student is allowed to opt out of data collection and analysis, could this have a negative impact on their academic progress? Second one, conflict with study goals. What should a student do if the suggestions are in conflict with their study goals? And third one, this is quite common as well in the literature, oversimplification. How can institutions avoid overly simplistic metrics and decision-making which ignore personal circumstances? So if you're interested in that, you can view those issues, but we captured those into a code of practice for learning analytics as well, which we worked on with experts from around the UK higher education field and students as well from the National Union of Students. And that ends up with a number of different sections. It's a very concise document looking at all the different legal issues, ethical issues that seem to be cropping up in conversations with people. So again, you can get hold of that. We have some universities that are using that as the basis for their own policies now in this area. And also the National Union of Students, that document on the right has taken a lot of that work and integrated it into their own guide for students' unions on learning analytics. So that, I feel, has moved the field forward quite a bit, because we're able to provide responses to it. Well, at least we know what all these issues are now. We've captured them, and we've got a list of the issues that institutions need to consider, and we've got guidance on how to tackle them as well. Looking at all of these areas together, we have something called the discovery phase, where we're working with Blackboard and a consortium of Unicon, which is an American software company, and Marist College in the United States. And they sent hit teams out to institutions to look at the various things they need to do to be ready for learning analytics. So this is Blackboard's deliverable from that process, a report as to the institutional readiness to make effective use of learning analytics tools. I won't go into the details of that, but a similar one from the other consortium that's going in there. So we've got quite a few universities being hit with this process now. They're all very different from each other, and it's a 3-day intensive visit with meetings with all the key players in those institutions. We also have a lot to do in the UK with our architecture for learning analytics, whether institutions are ready yet. So we're working with all these different project partners to build different aspects of the infrastructure, the technical infrastructure that you need for deploying learning analytics. And we've defined an open architecture. So the idea is that institutions could use bits of this and swap in other systems as they like. So just starting at the bottom there, if you look at the VLE, that's obviously one of the main data sources for learning analytics, the one used by most institutions. There's library data. There's all sorts of other systems, particularly attendance monitoring systems that institutions are increasingly deploying, which provide valuable data as to whether students are engaged to some extent or not. George mentioned wearable technology, so that one at the left, we've got what we're calling self-declared data, where students opt to send additional data, which may be useful. But of course, we're at the very early days of wearable technology here. And I was talking to a Korean last week at Dragon's excellent learning analytics conference in Edinburgh, who said he had done some experiments with school children using wearable technologies, and in particular some classes of teenage girls. And the trouble was, every time an attractive male teacher walked past, their blood pressure increased, and it completely messed up his data. So obviously we've got quite a long way to go before we can really build this into our understanding of learning. But it's great to see George making those research efforts there. Student information system is the other key data source that tends to be used, and that obviously looks at what students' backgrounds are, educational backgrounds, their gender, if that's relevant, their ethnic background, their postcode, and what courses they're studying, obviously, and their results. So all that data gets fed into a learning analytics warehouse, which consists of both that learning activity data that students are doing as they learn and the student information system, more static data. That's then acted on by a learning analytics processor, which has the smart bit and has predictive modelling. And that then populates a staff dashboard, so staff can see different types of dashboards, different types of information relevant to them. An alert and intervention system, which enables the appropriate alerts to be sent to people. For example, if a student's looks like they're about to drop out, that might get sent to a personal tutor. And then over on the right-hand side, we have a student app that we're developing to feed the learning analytics directly to students, which I'll go into a wee bit more in a minute, and a consent service, which we have not done much with yet. All the other bits are developed, basically. But that's there as a placeholder, and we think that's probably going to be more important because of the forthcoming European legislation, where students will have to give their consent for a lot more than we're asking them for at the moment, probably. Part of that process, we've done a lot of data modelling, and we've defined what we've called unified data definitions for some of that student information data. So it's transferred in a consistent way into the learning analytics warehouse. So there's the ethnicity bit for that. So there's the dashboards that we're providing. They're visual tools to allow people to view student engagement, comparisons with different cohorts, and we're using 2 different systems at the moment. But again, as I said, the idea is to be able to plug in different tools as universities wish to. There's also this alert and intervention system, which allows you to manage the whole interactions with students and has case management, intervention management, and it also feeds data back into the whole predictive model, so helps to refine those models all the time. And just briefly going to the student app, we developed this in collaboration with students. I worked with these students here at Lincoln University and various other places. We came up with these things that we felt were vital that the app were, that it was comparative, that allowed students to compare themselves with others. It was social, had a social element, so they could interact. It was gamified to some extent, so there was a fun element which encouraged them to use it. Private by default, so it didn't necessarily send anything they wanted back to the system or to anyone else. They were able to decide that. Usable standalone without being integrated into university systems, and an uncluttered interface. So this is some quick screenshots from the app. You can see that's an activity feed, just giving people ideas of what they've been doing and what others have been doing. Some statistics. So this might be very high engagement. You're in the top 10% this week for a particular subject. Students are also very keen to know what their attainment is and how that compares with others, which we don't traditionally give them that information. And you're also able to compare yourself with another student if that student gives you permission to do so. So you can compare yourself there with someone else and see what your level of engagement is on that course. Now, I know there's lots of caveats here. Engagement might not necessarily correlate with how you're actually going to do, how you're really learning, but it's an indication, and that's one of the best things we've got at the moment. So also students can set targets and decide what they want to do. So this person's decided they want to read for 10 hours a week because perhaps they've decided they're not reading enough or their tutor's told them that, and then they log it as they go through, and that then builds up into meeting their target. And also there's an idea of trophies. So the student got a gold badge trophy for spending more than 30 hours designing in 10 days. And again, lots of caveats here. It's all to do with how much you declare your own data as well as what's coming from the learning analytics data that's been assembled elsewhere. And it's very early days, but we're trying it out with a bunch of students at Strathclyde University imminently, and it'll be interesting to see how we get on. Now, the Just Learning Analytics programme has had, I think it's more like 80 expressions of interest now. We've got 24 institutions actually working on it, and that's the number that have done the discovery. 20 have agreed to do it, 11 have already completed. So lots of interest. And this is some examples of higher education activity. So you can see Russell Group University there wants to retain widening participation and support for students to achieve 2-1 or better. A research-led university there wants to work on retention, improve their teaching and empowering students. A teaching-led university with a widening participation mission is again interested, not surprisingly, in retention. This is a research-led university looking at student engagement, and a teaching-led one understanding how learning analytics can be used in general. Almost all institutions have Moodle or Blackboard, so we've worked with Blackboard to build what they call a building block to export the right data from Blackboard into the right format, and we've also got a similar plugin for Moodle. And it's been hard work getting these things to produce the same, or data in the same format, but that's getting there. So I think that's where we are with JISC. We've got time for a few questions.
We do. Yes, please. Questions? Jeff, please. I mean, when I think around what it's like around this traditional university, and I don't think most UK universities are so much different. For our residential programs, not for our online programs, fully online, our residential, most of what students do is not documentable by us. So we have this really kind of weird and very variable snapshot, the extent to which a course uses the VLE, the course next to it might barely use it at all. And has that come up as an issue? Because engagement with the VLE is not an absolute. Engagement with the library is not an absolute, because actually so much of it's digital, yet actually we can't record what individual students do because the journal providers don't give us those data back. So I find it difficult. I understand how to identify students who are really at high risk of failing, but anything other than that, I find it really quite hard to figure out how we would do it. And I just wondered what would come out of your experiment so far in terms of that gap between the data you can have and the desirable outcome, which is to help students learn better.
Well, yes, clearly there's an issue for many institutions that they don't, almost all institutions, that they don't collect data consistently across all students and across all courses. And I know that's probably even more exacerbated at more distributed traditional universities like Edinburgh and Oxford and Cambridge, for example. Highly autonomous units doing things in completely different ways, so it's difficult to get a consistent picture across the institution. One of the things I think will happen is that it drives, when institutions start seeing the benefits of these technologies, it will drive them to do things in different ways. So I think we'll see greater use of online learning, because it's a way of seeing where students are. And is it really the best model that we've got? I mean, you've heard this countless times, Jeff, and so have probably everyone else in this room, but that traditional lecture model, which has been unchanged for hundreds of years, is that the optimum way for students to learn? And most people think it isn't. So having more adaptive learning, more mixture of different modes where the student does interact with other students online and with adaptive learning and intelligent tutoring systems to some extent. That will then start to generate more data which we can use and to identify students' needs and those that are at risk of dropout. But I quite agree that we're at early stages, and some institutions will find this easier than others. So there's no simple answers.
First here and then.
Thanks, Neil. I think just started to say something about the question that I'm going to ask, which is a lot of this is about getting data that will allow us somehow to fix students. And I think I'm also interested in whether, as you talk to institutions, there's much of an appetite for using this sort of learning analytics to look back at the institution and say, well, what is it that we're doing that is actually causing students not to learn as successfully as we would like? In other words, to help us fix our institutions rather than just focus on some sort of methods of fixing students.
Yeah, so the JISC programme at the moment is primarily about these areas of retention and improving student performance. But when you look at the literature around learning analytics, there's increasing amounts of case studies around the world of curriculum enhancement. So I would say the three areas that learning analytics is concentrating on at the moment are early alert and student success systems, course prediction systems, so that it suggests, they're called recommender systems, which suggest future courses that students should use, which is really taking off in the United States. And then this whole area of curriculum enhancement, so looking at the data to see what you could do better with your courses. And there's all sorts of things that can be identified, and that can be either on the fly as the courses are taking place, or subsequently. All sorts of things that you can do, such as changing the group structure if a group discussion isn't working properly. You see that students are struggling with a bit of content, so you can direct them to new content. And again, you can do that either during the course or afterwards. So lots of people are doing that, and I quite agree that a lot of the problem here is not down to the students, but it's the way we teach, and that we could do things an awful lot better. Now, there is a sort of controversial area there as well, which is the whole area of teaching analytics, and whether we should be assessing teachers, which of course gets a lot of people very upset and wound up. And I can understand that. I could also see things from a student's point of view that why should they be subject to rubbish teaching? So somehow we're going to hit that at some point quite soon, I would think, especially with teaching excellent framework, which is going to be looking at how teaching works at an institution as well, and is suggesting that we might use learning analytics data to help it.
Great, there was one.
Yes, hello.
Hi.
It's very interesting what you're saying, and it's been presented as benefiting the learner. But I still wonder, looking at some of this, whether there are unintended consequences of students reflecting on comparing themselves against others, putting in a lot of effort, not achieving much, those kinds of things, and how we can deal with those sorts of situations.
Yeah, we're very aware of that as well, and this is going to be evaluated quite extensively, and it could have negative effects on some students. So they may say, right, well, I'm consistently in the lowest 10% here, but I've been busting a gut. So I think if the systems get more sophisticated, they might suggest, for example, that you go and have a chat with a tutor, and that you do bring a human into it. I mean, at the OU, for example, they have human mediation through the tutors, and the tutors are given dashboards showing where the students are or how they're engaging, and then they take the initiative to phone up a student who looks like they're at risk or having trouble somehow. And many people think that's the way to go. On the other hand, that is just too expensive to do, particularly at the Open University, which is on a huge scale. So the idea of giving students some idea of how they're performing is worth trying as well. And it may be that it's you set your sights in advance and you say, well, I really want to get a 2-1, in this course. And then the data's coming back, comparing you with previous cohorts of students who have got 2-1s, and saying, look, you just need to, if you want to get your 2-1, we recommend that you follow this profile of a successful student. So without being condemnatory, without saying, look, you're really not performing well, but just saying, this is what we recommend that you do. So a lot of it is in the wording as well, in how we approach students. But a good ethical argument, I think, here is that if we know something about a student, is it ethical for us to withhold that information? So if we know that you're on track to fail or to drop out, should we really withhold that, or should we tell you it in a diplomatic, concerned way and then help you to actually stay with the course and succeed?
Okay, thanks very much, Neil.
Thank you.
We are going to move on to our next speaker, Ryan Baker. Ryan Baker is an associate professor with Teachers College at Columbia University for another 2 months, and then he's moving to the University of Pennsylvania. Ryan is a highly influential researcher in the field of educational data mining and learning analytics. He is the founding president of the Society for International Educational Data Mining Society and has done lots of influential work in that space. Ryan, I think you will need to use this one.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, no worries at all. All right.
Ah, very good.
Very
Please
good.
Continue. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, no, that was it. So we are quite fortunate to have Ryan today. Ryan was at the Learning Analytics Conference last week, and then he volunteered to stay another day to interact with me. But then I managed to schedule 2 talks for him for today. So rather than just chatting with me, we have a pleasure to have Ryan to chat with many people today. Ryan, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Dragon, for... there we go. Thank you, Dragon, for your kind words, and thank you all for being here today. It's a great honor to have the chance to speak after 2 such distinguished speakers who've introduced all the main points, and now I can just make a few comments and be done with it. So we all know that learning analytics has great promise, but it's not always clear how to get it right. I like to say, and I grew up in rural Texas. Any Texans here? Excellent, I'm the only one. I can say whatever I want about Texas. Learning analytics is like a Texas high school locker room talking about sex. Everyone is talking about it. Many say they're doing it. A few are actually doing it. And no one's doing it very well. I'd like to offer a few considerations on doing it well. First key consideration, trust me, is simply not good enough. Whether you contract your institution's learning analytics out to a partner, and there are some very good organizations to work with to get learning analytics from, some of them are in this very room at this moment, or whether you build it yourself, you want to make sure you collect the evidence to be sure that it's working. You know, we get so excited about, look at all the exciting personalization we're doing, look at all the great reporting we're doing. Is what we're doing actually working? You need to make sure you collect the evidence to be sure that that's what's happening. You can do that in a few ways. You can do experiments or quasi-experiments. You don't have to necessarily match the highest methodological standard and still have useful evidence. So you could do things like within program randomized assignment, possibly at the level of the academic advisor, but that's hard to do in most universities. Most universities, people want to be getting kind of the best thing, similar to K-12 education. You could be doing a year versus the previous year comparison. Are you getting better results than last year? Are you maintaining better attention? Or you could do program by program assignment. You often end up with natural quasi-experiments like that because one faculty wants to adopt something before another faculty does. It's one of the advantages in some ways to the decentralization we were talking about just a minute ago. There are a lot of useful indicators. And one thing to think about is not just having one, but thinking of multiple of them. Do students complete the program there? Are they retained year by year? What are student course evaluations? You know, we all know that course evaluations are flawed in many ways. They're often correlated better to the attractiveness of the instructor and to the perceived ease of getting a good grade than they are to quality. But nonetheless, if student satisfaction radically goes up when you introduce a new system, that tells you you're doing something that's making some impact. Student course grades. Again, not a perfect indicator because instructors might raise the grades by dint of giving students more opportunities, but if you have some sort of standardized examination across many classes, you can see an effect. Student self-efficacy surveys. Do students feel like they're more likely to be able to succeed? That'll have a lot of impact. We talked a moment ago about the student who's told you're at the very bottom of the class over and over. That's something that's going to show up. You're going to see some students reducing their self-efficacy with your intervention if you aren't careful enough. Indicators of participation. Early assignment handling. You know, that'll tell you right at the beginning of the semester, is something going wrong? VLE logins. Are we getting students to participate more? Excellent. Something changed in the lighting and it's much better.
This one I did.
Thank you, Scottish weather. Stay that way for a minute. VLE forum participation. You know, are students engaging? These are things that will tell you if you're seeing better engagement from your analytics and from the interventions you do around it. Key consideration number 2, where's the model coming from? One hears many stories, and I'm told that this is on a live stream around the world, so I'll just say one hears many stories about a predictive model being built on data from a single arbitrary institution X, and then being used without modification or testing at a very different institution Y. I won't make any examples because, again, live stream to the world, but that's kind of scary, right? You don't want to think that, for example, a Russell Group institution, that you're building a model on data from a Russell Group institution, and then you're going to test it on a university that's radically different in kind. I picked that example because I don't know of any cases quite like that. Or a model being built with no data at all. That's really scary. The idea that somebody just came up with the predictive model off the top of your head, and it's going to be used with students. These things happen out there. You know, quite bluntly, if you've got a model being built with no data at all, it's snake oil. The whole point of analytics and data mining is that we have data and we can do great things with it to be able to make predictive models. If your uni is getting a model from a vendor that is completely made up out of somebody's clever head, you're in trouble. Ideally, the model used at your uni should be developed and tested on data from your uni. That's a really important point. That's something that we can do now. There's no reason not to test it for your university. If it's not possible in the very first year, you know, sometimes a university is so excited to get a new analytics approach that they're just going to run with it right away before they have the data to really build the models. I don't really like that approach, but if you're going to be doing it that way, you should at least be developed and test on data from multiple universities similar to yours. But ideally, the process that you follow is you give your data to the vendor, they test their model, maybe they refine their model, then you use that refined model that's got data from your university. Key consideration number 3, is the model validated thoroughly? Even if it's built on data from your university, is it done well? You know, it's not good enough to take a model, build it on 300 students, and declare it good. This is what state of the art was in the year 2005. It should be shown to be valid for unseen students. There's a mathematical procedure called cross-validation that people tend to like in the learning analytics and educational data mining communities. It's not the only way to do it. You could have a held-out test set, but you should be making sure the model works on students other than the ones it was built on. It should be from a representative sample from your programs. It should be from validated for each of the sizable demographics your university has. The same behaviors don't always mean the same things for different subsets of the student population. Just because it works on some students from your uni doesn't mean it'll work on all of them. And it's really easy if you imagine taking a data set with, say, 4,000 students, and 100 of them are representative of this specific underrepresented disadvantaged group. If you just kind of randomly take across the 4,000 when you test, You might have a model that works on the 3900 and doesn't work at all on the 100. That's a thing to be really mindful of. And again, these are the things you can ask your vendors or your internal teams developing to look at. Key consideration number 4, understanding what the model means. You know, sometimes you just get a prediction. This student has a 72% chance of not being retained. That's something, right? That's useful information. But ideally, you won't just get a prediction or a huge, meaninglessly large number of indicators. You'll get information on why a specific learner is at risk. And in interpreting this evidence, it's important for instructors and advisors to receive some training in what the indicators mean and the context they occur in. An instructor is not necessarily going to understand what it means that the student has made 3 posts on the forum and this one's made 7. Are they both okay? Are they both in trouble? You need to give some indicators of what they mean. And these meanings change. It's one of the things that we need to work together to create better understanding of, whether we're vendors or whether we're cross-institutional bodies or whether we're institutional researchers or the person who hired the institutional researcher. For example, the week of the course can matter a lot for what an indicator means. In one of my lab studies, in partnership with a virtual textbook vendor in the United States, we found that not having opened the e-textbook on the first day of the course catches most of the students who will fail, and also catches many students who won't fail. So it's a good indicator, but it's not a perfect one. It's actually useful because if you were to send a message to every student who hasn't opened the e-textbook yet on the first day, you'll catch almost all the students who will end up failing, and you'll only catch about a little under half of the students who won't fail. But if you haven't opened the e-textbook on day 14 of the course, almost everybody who hasn't opened the e-textbook by the 14th day of the course is going to fail the course in our sample. But there's a lot of students who will still fail but have opened the textbook by then. So the point being, it's one indicator, open the textbook or not. If you just have a dashboard that says, did they open the textbook, you need to prepare the instructor with some understanding of what that's going to mean. That could be at the level of the vendor, but let's not just ask everything from vendors. That also could be something that as a university rolls out this kind of system, they can be thinking about giving this information to instructors about what things mean. Another key consideration. Sorry, this talk is basically key consideration, key consideration, key consideration. I guess I have a lot of keys on my key ring or something. Look further. Most analytics are focused on immediate retention. I'm not trying to criticize vendors here, actually. This is true of the Learning Analytics Conference. It's true of the Educational Data Mining Conference. It's true of the field. We're mostly looking for stuff that happens in the short term. Why are we doing that? Because that's the data that's easy to get, right? If you want to get data on what happens in an individual course, well, just get data from that individual course and you're all set. If you want to get data what happens to a student 2 years later, my gosh, you've got to connect different university departments and get all that data linked together, which is often non-trivial. You can consider longer term indicators possibly available at your alumni office, and I'll go into a few examples in a minute. Fine-grained behavior now can predict big outcomes even a lot later. One example from our work is that we find that reading discussion forums and completing assignments in a postgraduate MOOC, Massive Online Open Course, predicts whether the participant will eventually submit a scientific paper to one of the relevant conferences. This is a poster presented at LAC and the Doctoral Consortium this week by my grad student Elle Lang, hopefully a journal paper soon. It's interesting, by the way, some indicators are predictive, some aren't. I'm about to start digressing, but it turns out that posting a lot is not nearly as predictive as just reading everything. That's in part because many students who post on Massive Online Open Course forums post about what the instructor's wearing or other relatively less academic topics. But so this is a case where this relatively simple indicator actually is predicting stuff that matters in the longer term. Another example would be that misuse of hints and feedback and careless errors in math homework at around the age of 13 can predict whether the student will eventually go into a math or science major in college several years later. So we can catch some of these indicators with if we put the right data sets together and support institutional researchers in doing this or vendors in doing this. This is saying that a uni has to support the vendor, right? Because for a vendor to provide this kind of functionality, the uni has to find a way to get them that data that they need. Or an institutional research department has to be able to do it. There's a lot of players that can do it, but they need support. And ideally, we can use these things to predict who's on track to complete their university studies, succeed in their career. You know, you can think about taking alumni office data to do this. And if your alumni office doesn't have data on this, maybe they should be crawling LinkedIn. Be a credit to the university, right? Ideally, we don't just want to have people graduating from, I'll pick the example local here, the University of Edinburgh. We don't want to just have them get jobs. We really want to have them be a success in their careers. You know, someday donate lots of money to dear old uni. You know, you can take the Texan out of Texas, but you can't take the Texas out of the Texan, right? So there's a lot of considerations. Just to kind of really quickly, you know, go back through them. You need to be working with the partners that you have in order to validate that your stuff works, that you're really making a difference. You need to be getting models that are validated in an appropriate way as the basis of what you're doing, and insisting that vendors provide those, or that you develop, what you develop yourself is done that way. You need to validate the model on the full diversity of your students. Figure out what the model means and be able to train the people who are going to be using it in thinking through those issues appropriately. And looking towards longer term indicators and not just what leads to immediate success. Because let's face it, if you just want to get students who are going to pass their course, just tell the instructor to pass them all, right? That will have that short-term effect, but it won't actually produce what we really care about, which is improving people's lives. So thank you very much for your attention. If you're interested in reading our scientific work in the future, you can follow our Twitter, Facebook, or Weibo feeds. If you're interested in learning our methodologies, go to our online textbook, which is also on edX book, and all our lab locations are available online. I'm not the lettings agent in Manchester. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Ryan. Any questions, comments, reflections around stuff? Jeff, please.
I was really taken by your idea about the long-term outcomes. And of course, I think if you ask any university, and actually we do philanthropic donations in the UK, so it's not just Texas. But actually, we probably wouldn't say that in public. But we certainly would say a success in a career and being a credit to the university. I mean, have you seen any examples? Do you know of people who've actually reasonably successfully managed to do that stretch out into the future and get away from just how well you're doing on the course now? There are other people who've done those alumni measures or longer-term measures using historical data because they would have to. Has it worked in some way?
I don't know of any published examples. I mean, you saw some of my examples that didn't get to alumni data but got to several year outcomes from my lab. There are a few research labs that have done that. And there are some efforts, for example, to do, there are a few papers that track from high school or middle school experiences into uni. I don't know of any published examples that go all the way through to the alumni data, although I'm aware of specific universities in the United States that are doing this very quietly. But they're largely making efforts not to even talk about it at meetings like this one.
That's helpful.
I don't think it's very helpful. I mean, you're very kind, but
No, it is the fact that people think about doing it quietly is very helpful.
Yeah, I would like to see more openness about this, and I think actually the UK is a little bit ahead of the United States in terms of talking about these things publicly, and I think that a lot of that has to do with the more public model of education. And Spain is also quite the leader in publishing a lot of analytics models publicly for people to see, and I think it again has to do with the different funding model of universities. We're very competitive.
Other questions, comments?
Great. Well, I hope I didn't bore you all into silence, but it was a very enjoyable talk to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much. we have a few more minutes, so I want to open the floor for any further discussions and any kind of comments or reflections on the talks that we had, but also overall kind of ideas or intentions related to learning analytics and kind of the perspectives that you are bringing from your own institutions. No? Or I'm standing here between you and your coffee and tea. Okay, well then let's break, have a coffee break for about half an hour, and then we're gonna continue at 3:15. Or at 3. At 3, yes.
20 minutes.
Yeah, 20 minutes. Okay, thanks very much. everybody's enjoying. I understand everybody's enjoying chatting and their tea and coffee, but I would appreciate if you can come over here and we can continue with our program for today. Our next session is a panel. It's a panel session composed of the representatives of three organizations, three vendors that are doing learning analytics and providing services in terms of learning analytics as well products. We basically have a representative of Desire to Learn. We have a representative of Blackboard and also Civitas Learning. So the idea is that they will initially start with their brief statement just to give kind of an overview of the work that they are doing. And we thought, using perhaps slides might be more kind of detailed to just give a big picture in terms of what they do. And then we will have more interactive session in terms of discussing about different ways of engagement with different institutions, different case studies, different experiences they can share with you, and also pathways that you can see that universities in Scotland can also take when they are engaging with external learning analytics service providers. So our first speaker will be Shadi Shaheda, who comes from Desire to Learn in Canada, who is the principal data scientist with Desire to Learn. Our second speaker will be John Whitmar, who is the director of learning analytics program with Blackboard. And then our third panelist for today will be Mark Milleron, who is the chief learning officer and co-founder of the Civitas Learning Organization out of Austin, Texas. So, Shadi, please.
Thank you, Dragan. Thank you, Dragan, for the introduction. Very glad to be here. I think it's a great opportunity to talk about learning analytics, and I think this group is the group that can drive learning analytics to the next phase. So I believe that we believe that the collaboration between vendors and the education institutions is very important for the learning analytics field to drive. D2L mission is to deliver innovative solutions that transform teaching and learning. And we believe that applied research is one of the key important aspects in order to do that. So D2L, or Desire to Learn, or Bright Space, all of them are the same thing, just for the clarity. We provide learning management system, learning management ecosystem, e-portfolio kinds of with pages for like Facebook kinds of learning object repository to save data on learning resources as a repository for learning resources, competency-based learning, and learning analytics. I'm going to focus on learning analytics specifically. So you can look at learning analytics as we have the data platform, and we have three kinds of predictive modeling or collaborative filtering kinds of products. So a product based on the program level, a product based on the course level, and the content level. So program level called Degree Campus, the course level Student Success System, and the content level is LEAP, Learning Path. So when we go to the organization, we want to make sure that we have kinds of data strategy. And this is one of the biggest challenges that we find. We'd like to make sure that there is a culture of data in the organization in order to be able to drive predictive analytics. And this is starting from ETL data integration, data warehouse, building up report and visualization, and ending to predictive analytics and prescriptive analytics as well. So this kinds of data platform that we aim to for the organization in order to be able to drive learning analytics. So I'll start with the Degree Campus. This kinds of collaborative filtering, like Netflix, if both people seeing the same movie, most probably the movies that the other people seeing will be related to the second one. And the idea is it recommends set of courses that these courses the student be successful at, so they'll be able to finish that program, which will impact graduation retention rate. The other product called Student Success System, which is called at this course level. So what we talked about is just program in general. I want to make sure that the students would be able to finish the list of the courses to be able to be successful in the program. And this is going to each course itself. So looking at each course and trying to drive the predictions per week. Unfortunately, it was better on my machine, but anyway. So you can look at the predictions as a success index and look at the different domains that these predictions intended to, and you can look at the prediction over the weeks for each student. So each cycle of these is a student, and you'd like to know where the student lies on withdraw, dropout, or academic performance risk, or under engagement risk, or on track. And the third product is LEAP, personalized learning. So now we are going to the content, and we'd like to see if the student is learning or not. And this is the third level that I'm talking about. So we relate between the content, learning objectives, and the assessment. Does the student learn this content or not? And how can we know that based on an assessment that we drive for each content? And based on this assessment, we know that if he achieves or she achieves the learning objectives or not. So in order to improve or enhance impact, we believe on these 4 cycles: design, analyze, intervene, and evaluate. And we believe that these 4 aspects are very intertwined together. You can't have one without the other. Starting from the learning design, we drive, establish hypotheses, list of assumptions, have experiments with the user in order to make sure that we have teaching models. And this will drive data that can be fit into the learning analytics, which collect data, build predictive models. And this kind of feedback is very important because we can't provide analytics on data that we don't know what we capture for. And then we have different levels for research and development, evaluation, and study the impact. So this kind of visualization that you can see in student success in, I want to go into details, but you can see the students and the predictions success index. And here we look at the assessment and capture the social learning as well, some kinds of collaborations between the students and discussions where each circle is a student and try to find a social kind of analysis between the students. And then we evaluate the model. And this is one of the very important pieces I would like to emphasize here. After we build a predictive model, so what? Is it useful? It's working? We look at kinds of difference between predicted and actual grade, and so see it across time and over all weeks. And this is just to show some of the results that starting from a very small number and going down over time. And the reason behind this is the more the data you get, the better predictive model you have. And then, okay, now the model is accurate. So what? Is it useful? Does the student improve? We go with early adopter program with our institutions to collaborate and get feedback in order to intervene and making sure that this predictive model is used. And then having early intervention and look at the measure of the impact. So if we say that the students that are successful is bigger than 75 and the potential risk between 65 to 75 at risk is less than 60, these are some of the examples of the impact of the positive impacts for student success system on the institutions. This doesn't mean that there is no negative impact sometimes. We see negative impacts. So what do we do is we go to the institution and understand what kind of intervention they did. So if you have multiple courses and you see one courses have higher impact than the other, this means that we need to know what kind of intervention. Sometimes the intervention is not useful to improve the impact. So you can see different spring on the fall and with different semester. So we believe that these kinds of circles from learning design, analytics, intervention, and evaluate the interventions and getting back as a feedback loop to the design is very important to improve the impact. Thank you.
Wow. A little too used to my Mac, I think, at this point. There we go. Great. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me, and it's very exciting to see such excitement and interest here in the UK around learning analytics. So I'm John Whitmer. I direct the analytics efforts at Blackboard. I worked in higher education doing primary research around how VLE use in student demographic and background characteristics are related to achievement. And about 2 years ago, working with Blackboard, they asked me to come aboard and help lead a new generation of efforts around how to create products and services that could use those findings and scale them out to serve a large number of institutions. So it's very exciting for me to be able to apply that research, and I now lead a data science team at Blackboard that does just that. So I just have a few slides today and look forward to the conversation. The first slide here is around how we understand analytics. So the first thing for us is that we don't actually do analytics, right? As Blackboard sees analytics as a way to solve a problem, a way to solve an issue or address something that an institution desires to do. So we look at this in a specific way, looking at specific solutions and specific desires around curriculum, around student success, around student outcomes is how we look at analytics. And most of our efforts there really revolve around using and taking data that's collected by the VLE and other systems and transforming that into information that someone can do something about. There needs to be a stage for intervention and to act on that data. We have ways to do that, but primarily Blackboard feels that at this point that intervention is something that needs to be done by a person. And there are other tools outside of our analytic solutions to do that with. So Dragan asked me to kind of present what our portfolio of solutions are, and they break down very quickly and simply into these 4 levels of services. So 2 of these are efforts that were acquisitions Blackboard made in the last year, demonstrating our commitment to the space. One that I've been very involved in is X-Ray for Moodle, X-Ray Learning Analytics. And that is something that's integrated into Moodle, and it identifies students who are at risk using multiple measures of LMS participation. So not only showing, I think as Ryan said, not only identifying a student who is at risk and showing a score, but giving an illustration of what can be done and why they are at risk. It can also be used to improve course management, and so looking at courses, not just individual students, but courses overall, and being able to use that information to make outcomes-oriented course redesign. I very strongly believe, and I'm seeing in the research right now, that we're moving from an identification and focus on an individual learner to looking broader at curriculum in ways that we can really kind of raise the effectiveness and raise the success of all learners. I think that and seeing that that area of intervention, something where institutions have that responsibility, I think really is the next domain for doing some really exciting work in learning analytics. The second product that we offer is Blackboard Predict, which supports student success by identifying students who may drop out or not meet their full potential. We can look at any kind of predictive variable and understanding, especially at premier unis here in the UK, maybe that not succeeding, dropping out may not be meaningful, right? It may be some other kind of prediction that you can look at that will be meaningful in your context. So we surface that data and design dashboards that could be used by both faculty members or advisors working with groups of students, and we also provide that data to students about those predictions, and so that they can look at where they are headed and what their potential is. And the third is Analytics for Learn, our product that is created for both advisors as well as faculty members. And it provides insights using a data warehouse type solution that you can interact with, that you can design your own queries and filters or your own kind of analyses and visualizations to look at the relationship between many things, especially the use of the VLE, use of Learn in this case, by the student background, their educational background, their demographic background, and look at how those are related together with their outcomes at the course level and program level over time. And that, excuse me, is really the unique part of that solution is this ability to track and interrogate longitudinal outcomes that you can aggregate up or disaggregate and drill in to gain the insights someone needs. So, and underlying all of this, we have consulting services. Neil mentioned that we are participating as collaborators with the JISC project, and we have people that will work at the strategic level to help help institutions work through what your questions are and what you want to do, as well as technical consultants who can dive deeply into the data and look at whether what you want to ask is available within the data that you have available. So looking at the product level, X-Ray for Moodle Rooms is classroom engagement activity. It has over 30 visualizations. We have it for Moodle Rooms. That looks only at right now. That's kind of focused on current courses. Predict looks at the current course and the future course. And Analytics for Learn also allows you to look historically into past courses. And since I lead the data science team, I wanted to end with this slide that says that the work we are doing and what we're finding and putting into these products, they're really based in fundamental research that we're doing and we're performing at scale. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Mark Miller with Civitas Learning. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our organization. We're a different kind of organization. We are a social purpose corporation that is totally focused on trying to help partner with forward-thinking universities and colleges to try to help more students learn well and finish strong. We are totally focused on helping you make the most of your learning data. And just to give you an idea of our theory of work, what we see in the clients that we're working with, we began with a beta project of about 6 institutions, 4 universities, 2 community colleges, and did about a 2-year beta program to learn how to do this work well. And then after that, we started opening our doors to work with other universities and colleges, and we've been doing that for about 2.5 years. And it's all based on this idea that institutions care deeply about helping their students learn well and finish strong, but more and more institutions are swimming in what I would call initiative fatigue. They're doing a whole lot of things to try to help students learn well and finish strong, and it's kind of overwhelming. And so part of our theory was that if we could help them develop an analytics platform and set of services that could help them undergird this work, we could help them be more precise and actually get very focused on what could actually add the most value. So this is a kind of a quick, simple summary of this theory of work. The basic idea is insight on the y-axis, action on the x-axis. Low insight is you can only do the data work you have to do for compliance and reporting. High insight is deep predictive flow modeling, like all the stuff we've been talking about here. Low action is you're not changing much, you're keeping things the way you are, always kept them. High action is you're innovating with policy, practice, new techniques, new technologies, and sometimes people programs if you want to do it. What's clear is there are some institutions that are clearly low. They only do the data work they have to do because they have to do it, and they don't want to change much. A friend of mine who works in institutional research calls this data-driven decision-making, which means the administrators make a decision and they drive you to find data to back up the decision they already made, right? Then you've got this upper left-hand quadrant where people have actually done really sophisticated data work, but by the time, the challenge in this upper left-hand quadrant is often by the time they've cleaned, staged, and analyzed the data, the students about whom they've collected the data are not there anymore. Our chief data scientist comes from the world of healthcare, and he was amazed as he came into the world of education. What he basically said is, I'm totally befuddled about why education is so obsessed with autopsy data, because we spend most of our time on people who are no longer with us. He's like, he goes, wouldn't they rather have data during the operation or diagnostic data? I'm like, that's exactly the shift we're trying to help enable. But even more challenging in this upper left-hand quadrant is often the people who had their hands on the data were not the people who could actually affect change. So it wasn't the people on the front lines, the faculty, the advisors, and the students who benefit from the data the most. This lower right-hand corner, I was the deputy director for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and we funded hundreds of millions of dollars of innovation work into the world of higher ed. And one of the most frustrating things was the world of higher ed is completely moved by this notion of other good people who've done good work. People tend to model it, and not necessarily because their data says they should do it, it's because they want one of those too. And you end up with a lot of these kinds of initiatives that weren't based on their data. They didn't try and test the outcomes. And again, the idea of not being able to kind of tune it. So our whole theory was that if we could help institutions develop an infrastructure for analytics, a home analytics system, if you will, that they could, one, use their data to pinpoint their challenges. They could instrument and try and test their solutions. And third, they could innovate with apps that went directly to the front line, students, faculty, advisors, and others. So we've been working with a variety of institutions. These aren't all of them. This is just to give you an idea. We've tried to show the use cases in elite institutions, access institutions, community colleges, private independent, but trying to show that this is about optimizing for all students. This is about optimizing the student experience in all kinds of ways, helping them get the most out of it academically, making the most social connections, the best experiences to kind of drive them on this path. Now, this is how this all comes together. Our challenge is in the world of analytics, often it gets misrepresented as the way to do this is you take just a few variables and data points, you build a simple predictive model, you power one app, and then you say you're doing analytics. Our vision is that we think what is going to come together, what we've learned in terms of how we do this, is the way to build an infrastructure around this is to basically harvest your data from multiple systems, and we have clients that are bringing in upwards of 14 different systems because they are leaving data trails. And when you pull that data together, you then can start doing the work of creating the derivative variables. And the derivative variables, what we found in doing this work with our team of data scientists, drives about 95% of the predictive power of your models. Which means having just single data points and doing regressions against it is not the way to do this. The way to do this is actually pull this together institution by institution and create the derivative variables for that institution. We also have patented something called data availability segmentation, which means that we optimize based on student data availability and then create predictive clusters on top of that. And we create institution-specific predictive models. We have found it is impossible to find a unifying predictive model that works across higher education. As we heard in the last presentation, this idea of getting institution-specific models radically matters, and you have to keep them retuned. How many of you have ever driven on a GPS system that's out of date? Right? And the idea is you have to kind of tune this term by term by term and keep it going. We've now deployed over 1,500 predictive models and are retuning them on a regular basis. And the greatest thing about this is the reps. Our data scientists now have reps on doing this with lots of different kinds of institutions. And then if you do this the right way, you can power lots of different applications and actions, which means you can get apps to faculty, apps to students, apps to advisors, and you can instruct and inform actions, policy change, practice change, initiatives that you've launched, and you can instrument them to see what kind of impact you're actually seeing so that you can impact all kinds of folks across the infrastructure at the institution. So that's kind of our theory of this, and in doing this work, our core infrastructure is this Student Insights platform, which pulls all this data together. The view of that is we have a tool called Illum, and Illum gives you a view of student progression. It gives you a view of your course pathways and the impact of grades and signals in your curriculum pathways. So you've got predictions about your student progression, about your courses, and then we have impact analytics. And impact analytics is where we can help you stack rank your major initiatives and see which one of them are actually seeing the best effect size for your students. And then we have apps that go directly to students, faculty, and advisors, and all of them have been tested in the field at scale. We're now touching close to 6 million students in our active data set, so we're learning a lot about how to do this work, and especially doing the consulting work to get on the ground with people to build this out. We're also releasing the data mart capability so institutions can do their own data work around this, and the idea of having third-party app support. So we're supporting folks like Salesforce and other vendors, the idea they can use this plumbing, if you will, to kind of drive their larger analytics work. What we're seeing as we're doing this work, and we do every single one of our initiatives we test. We have sent more than 1.4 million nudges in the last year alone, and every single nudge you have to test. In the very beginning, a lot of our clients thought if you just had the risk model, you had it all handled. Absolutely not. What you found out is sending the wrong kind of nudge is almost as damaging as not sending a nudge at all. And the idea of figuring out how to do that makes a big difference. And so for all of our initiatives, we actually do deep, kind of rigorous experimental design. We've done everything from our RCT, but we've also patented something called prediction-based propensity score matching. And the prediction-based propensity score matching means for every major initiative, we do a control group test to see what the effect size are. And when we get into the conversation, we can talk deeper about each of the case studies around this. Our whole idea is to try to help build this infrastructure for folks, and if you stay for the executive briefing afterwards, we can show you what the app design looks like. We've actually found out that it is vitally important that you not only get the analytics right underpinning this, but you actually have to do the design thinking to really kind of do the user testing to figure out the right way. It's about building the right infrastructure to get the right data to the right people in the right way, and then it all comes together, and it can innovate together with the kind of data pieces that really can help you make a difference. Thanks, folks.
critical points. I'm going to ask you questions, but I'm going to also encourage you if you also have any questions in the meantime, just please jump in and out. So, I mean, obviously, plenty of exciting technologies and plenty of exciting approaches, but I think many also people are just to adopt here. Let's try perhaps here some of the suitable case studies you would like to kind of point to and show kind of very specific examples that you are particularly proud of or where you found plenty of challenges. So who would like to start? John?
I can start, sure. Probably I'll have one. So Indian River Virtual College is an example I would point to as someone we're proud of. It was a campus that was growing their online program dramatically, and they were finding that they were having real drops in persistence within that program as they did so. And so they wanted a method through which they could identify and intervene with at-risk students who were identified early enough on that they could do something about it. And someone had asked a question earlier that they mandated that every single instructor use an app, a dashboard, that was produced through Analytics for Learn in order to identify those instructors. And people who didn't use that app got called into the office, as it were, to talk about why they weren't doing so. So there was an institutional strategic need, and then they identified a way to work on that, and they actually closed the gap. They closed the gap between online and on-campus students within, I think, 18 months of doing so. I could have that timing wrong. Richard's nodding his head, so I think that's right. So to me, that's an example of using a technology within a well-defined goal and having a means to make that change, really kind of defined at the systematic level. And those are some of the things that are really required outside of, or in addition to, as Mark said, having an accurate predictive model, right? The model didn't do any of those other pieces, so having a whole system to bring that together, I think, is what made that successful.
So we had George Southern University. They had problem of the dropout rate of the students, and actually they adopt the student success system, and they built using the student success system like predictive modeling, and they themselves make a study and found out that about 86% accuracy, and it improved the dropout rate for the students. And actually they published this study. We also made another joint experiments with college and university, and these are the ones that I showed in my presentation. And the idea is we try to see the impact of any of learning analytics product before and after use. And this is very important because you can build any predictive model, but does it work or not? Does it have an impact or not? Does the intervention really works or not? And there are many variables into this stage, and many variables in this journey. And with the controlled experiment, we try to fix the variables as much as possible with the same instructor, with the same distribution and performance of the students into two sections, and try to come up really with the causation and all the correlation of that this predictive analytics was not. There's other universities, University of Wisconsin, Greenville, and there are multiple cases that I can please to show you and show the details of these products and the impact.
So we named our organization Civitas Learning because it means community learning together. And we have a website called Civitas Learning Space, and it's kind of our digital repository for case studies and learnings across the Civitas. And it's a place where the diverse colleges and universities are sharing the models of, from places like Grinnell that have a 96% completion rate that are all about thriving and student experience, and other places that are really trying to help first generation diverse students actually get across the stage. But probably one of the best models I'd love to have you think about is to go to the organization level. One of our colleges in Austin, when we did the first data infrastructure run, the data pointed to two big issues for them. We always talk about this idea of the dial. You optimize the data to maximize your insight, to inform your action, to continue your learning. That's the idea of the dial. It's data, insight, action, learning. And when we did the optimization of the data and turned the lights on with the insights, It was pretty clear they're having major challenges in math education, especially if they wanted to improve their STEM pathways. They needed to get math education better as a trajectory. And second, they were having real challenges in advising. Students were having a hard time getting the right courses in the right sequence in the right time. So their two interventions they decided to kind of bet big on was one, they bet on an app that went directly to students for advising that was called Degree Map, and we helped co-develop that with them. And the second one is they launched what was called the Accelerator, which was a modular accelerated math program, Math Emporium, very similar to what Virginia Tech had rolled out. And we instrumented that with the analytics to look at the larger impact of it. And what we were able to see, for example, with the Degree Map app, was when we worked hand in hand with the advisors and designed the app in a really light, clean way for the students to actually get this data, it was transformational because a student would get visualizations of exactly where they were. It would do the Amazon thing. It would basically say, a student like you at this stage, here's the next set of courses you probably should take. And it would allow them to stand on the shoulders of thousands of students who came before, avoid toxic course combinations, find synergistic course combinations, and at least have a default choice that was based on success. And then if they wanted to change majors, it would actually do an optimization match of their credit accumulation against all the credentials at the institution. And they immediately saw an impact of this at their institution, with students being able to kind of look at this. And we've seen up anywhere from a 3 to 9 percentage point bump with their effectiveness and their persistence and their overall success rate with the use of Degree Map. Basically, the more they use it, the better they do. And then they looked at the impact analytics of the Math Accelerator. And the thing that really, not only did they have an overall anywhere from an 8 to 10 percentage point bump in math completion and persistence and effectiveness, and not only completing the course but being successful in their subsequent course, it had upwards of a 14 to 15 percentage point bump on their minority student population, which was a population they were specifically trying to target. And this is with deep propensity score matching, so they were able to actually do the control groups to understand how it influenced. So the president was able to go back to the board and say, okay, this $11 million we invested in this large-scale intervention has had this kind of impact, and now they've gone to the point where now they have close to 5,000 students that are leveraging that Math Accelerator with great kind of outcomes. So the thing I love about that, Dragon, is the idea is they use the data to pinpoint their toughest challenges, they pick some innovations to bet on, and they measure the heck out of them. And they're tuning them. They're actually tuning the way they're doing the accelerator now, and they've actually tuned the way they're leveraging Degree Map in their student success initiatives.
Great, thanks very much. Another question, and quite frequently we found, for example, last year we completed one project in Australia in which we interviewed vice principals, or in their case, the deputy vice chancellors of learning and teaching, or those who were responsible for implementation of learning analytics. In some cases, we basically asked them, okay, what's the state of learning analytics? They said, problem solved. How? Well, we built this beautiful product, and learning analytics problem solved. And I think that's pretty much kind of the recipe for failure. And my question is basically for you is, in your kind of opinion, what would be those necessary steps institutions need to consider that are for them important if they want to make sure that they have successful learning analytics implementation and adoption and general institutional influence? So we'd like to start this time. Maybe Shadi?
Okay, this is a good question. It's a tough one as well. So, learning analytics is not only technical. So you look at it on, I would say, like two areas. The technical side and the cultural side. The technical side is you want to make sure that you collect the data sets that you need to build the learning analytics product that you're looking for. And this is not easy because you want to build the infrastructure and making sure that you have all the data from all the data systems. And you would like also to make sure that the data are in a quality form, which is a big, big issue with all the data governance problem, the data quality, the data validation, and there are many metrics in order to see the quality of the data. And this kind of data strategy that you want to build in the organization, which lead to the cultural side. I would go back to George Siemens' presentation today, like, you want to make sure that this data strategy is having all the culture that the decision maker in the institutions adopt the data as an asset. And they're looking at the data differently, and the output of the learning analytics will be in the decision-making process. We can provide lots of models, can come up with very, very good recommendations. Are they going to be used or not? And are we going to use it in a way that will drive decisions and not just provide visualization that people will look at? So it's a cultural change in the organization, starting from all the hierarchy, from the organization, the decision makers, till the people that do the work. And what we found when we work with the organization is we start with making sure that we build then the data strategy. That's the slide I showed. This is the data strategy that we want you guys to adopt. And sometimes organizations are not ready for data analytics. And they will start first with the maturity model of the data. You can go to an organization, because data analytics is a buzzword, right? People want to do data analytics. But maybe they don't need data analytics, just need some kind of reporting that on the data. Are they in the state that really needs data analytics or not? They may be just having some kind of business intelligence report that you can provide. So I would start at the beginning evaluating the maturity model of the data in each organization. This is what we do. And then from that point, we go to the why you need data analytics. Analytics has different perspective, predictive, and subscriptive. And then go to the cultural side, which is much more complicated compared to the technical side.
Great, thanks. Mark?
So in our work, I'd say kind of three big things. One is, as the process unfolds, one is having the courage to turn the lights on. When you start pulling the data together and you start turning the lights on, the data start pointing to things that aren't so positive, you've got to be willing to kind of uncover and start doing the work to figure out what's happening, which isn't always the most comfortable thing. And that relates to the second big issue, which is committing yourself to a culture where you're thinking constantly about how you democratize data, how you get data to the front lines. What we see is a lot of people are looking for the $100 bill, but it's actually better for them to pick up a lot of ones and change, right? The idea is to figure out that the notion of aggregated marginal gains, small moves on the front line, add up over time to big gains in the long run. And by the way, this can be in improving the student experience and deeper learning. It isn't just about helping struggling students, it's about helping the high-achieving students kind of really go to the ceiling, get rid of the ceiling. And what we've seen is if you do, that means you have to do the design thinking work of figuring out how to get the data the right way to those folks. Again, you got to build the right infrastructure to get the right data to the right people in the right way. The right way is not always a spreadsheet or a dashboard. Sometimes it's a simple app, a simple visualization, but you've got to test that. You've got to figure out, so one of our clients, for example, when the predictive model said the student was at risk, they actually put out this big intervention email to the student about all the things they could be doing to get themselves back on track. And we encouraged them to test, and what they found out is it had a negative return. And they ended up trying a bunch of different kinds of outreach, and what they found out, the one that had the highest impact was a short, empathetic note from somebody the student knew. And the note that was the highest was this simple phrase that said, "I'm just checking in, everything okay?" with a question mark. That had the highest lift, the biggest response rate. But my favorite thing about it is they tested that to figure out how they could get it to the front lines. But that means you've got to be committed to getting data to faculty, to students, to advisors, and to testing the way they can get the data. And my thing to students is always, we use student data all the time. What students want to know is, can you use my data to help me make a better choice, go in a better direction? So let's test that out and figure that out. By the way, that means we as an institution need to say, we're going to spend as much time on action analytics as we do on accountability analytics. Because all the effort right now is on accountability analytics, and if we can turn that around and say, we're going to try to get good data in the hands of students, in the hands of faculty, in the hands of advisors, we can kind of change that trajectory. That helps a lot, right? And the idea of kind of building this out as a standing conversation, I think allows you to get to the final thing. And I think the final thing is to anchor it in the core purposes of the organization. The analytics have to be to the ends of the organization and be connected to the mission, vision, values of the organization. What we have seen is if it's just one kind of analytics for one kind of purpose, it ends up being good but not great. If you really want this to go to the next level, you've got to figure out how this infrastructure can support the broad mission, vision, and values and goals of the organization and figure out how it plays into that mix. If you do that, then it becomes, and this is really important, probably the most important one, this can't be another initiative. Your faculty and staff and folks will kill you if it's another initiative. This has got to be a power tool that actually helps you understand the impact of your initiatives and helps power your other initiatives at the institution. Does that make sense? It's a different way of approaching it.
I'll just say two quick things that we've seen. I think the first, following up on what Mark just said, is I'll maybe flip this and be controversial for a minute or be negative, that we've seen many organizations fail at analytics because they don't have a well-defined question and need in advance. We see institutions saying, we want analytics, like it's a thing, right? We want to get that thing because it's in vogue and it's, and data is something that a lot of people are looking at. Having a well-defined, concrete, and specific need that you can demonstrate, then you can modify, you can demonstrate that whether you're meeting that or not. That's, I think, the biggest need for success. And maybe for many people here, but probably them preaching to the choir, I would guess, but that's something to be very clear about. The second is to be clear that you have something you can do about it. So we see many shelf reports created, and I've worked for institutions where we've created really effective, really highly accurate models, but they didn't have anyone to do anything with them, right? So making sure that what you're creating is something someone can act on. And that could mean if you don't have advisors, right, maybe you work with deans, maybe you work with other people to create the kind of information that's relevant for that problem in their context.
Great. Thanks very much. The other question which comes up very quickly and in any conversation related to learning analytics, especially in Europe, it's privacy protection and also ethical use of data. And especially I think it's very relevant in Europe as a consequence of the recent directive of the European Union, which basically has the right to be forgotten. So what are kind of industry best practices and what kind of strategies do you take inside of some of your work in analytics and types of barriers potentially that you are seeing in terms of analytics implementation and adoption?
So just quickly, we often use this little privacy pyramid to talk about three big things. And the first one is absolute effort to protect student privacy. And for us, we actually stand up an institution-specific cloud, and we operate in the United States, it's called FERPA, but it is a privacy-compliant vendor that works just on them when they're standing cloud. And then everything, all the PII is stripped out and tokenized before we get to the cloud. So we do all the work to make sure we can keep the student data private. You absolutely have to do that, and you have to be able to have that rock-solid technology to take that seriously. And I do think the idea of the right to be forgotten is going to be an interesting one. I think we've got to have the conversations with students about when and how that actually happens, when they want to share the data and how they can add value. The second thing on the privacy side, I'm going to flip and talk about how this relates to the institution. You saw in my conversation about the fact that 95% of the predictive power of our models comes from feature variables or the derivative variables when you combine data sets from LMS and CRM and card swipe and SIS, especially SIS and LMS, by the way. We have a challenge in that some vendors in the space are trying to commoditize what they call data exhaust from your system. So as more and more institutions are staging in the cloud their curriculum resources or whatever tools, there are people who are trying to charge them back for their own data. And the problem is if you're being charged back for your own data, our institutions call that data jail. Their data is being held in kind of this virtual data jail, and they can't get their own data back to be able to do this kind of analytics. And so they're actually putting in place policies and practices for RFPs and contracts that require the vendors to get them their own data back so they can do this kind of larger work so you can actually take this on. But data jail is not a little thing. With the digitalization of our educational kind of journeys and more work going to the cloud, this is a really big deal. Analytics. You've got to get your arms around data jail because it's only going to get worse if you don't get policy and practice around it. The third thing, most important thing, is every other, I hate the term big data, but I'm going to use that. Every other big data play in other sectors, how they make their money, if you look at social media and Facebook and LinkedIn, whatever else it is, how they make their money is they commoditize the customer data. It actually turns into something that they can commoditize to other folks, whether it's through advertising or strategic insight. That's not going to work in education. We can't do that in education. We're not going to be selling the data to the publishers or whatever else. It's not going to work. So that combined with the real creepy uses of this to actually do things that students do not want you to do. I think one of the things that our folks, we've actually done 5 data symposiums on this. Our partners are coming together around this idea of intentional education policy around student privacy and basically saying you're going to use student data for 2 purposes, which is 1, to radically improve the student experience So the idea of making the educational institution better at serving those students, that's purpose one. And purpose two is to democratize data, to get data in the hands of faculty, in the hands of advisors, in the hands of students, so that they can, at minimum, they can participate in their own rescue. And at best, they're captaining their own ship, right? And kind of going on some powerful directions. But the idea, and I love the conversation earlier about the ethical responsibility, if we're sitting on their data, that could be helping them right now. And the idea of getting to them in the right way is powerful. But those are the two purposes, and those are the only purposes. And if we can get that into policy, I think we can inoculate some of the major challenges that are going to come our way so people know why we want to use the data. Those are the purposes, and that's it, full stop. I think it can stop some of the challenges down the road.
Great, thanks. John, what do you want?
So it's a challenge. I mean, the data privacy issue is a substantial challenge. And so, I mean, the first thing is safe harbor regulations are things that we follow. And we have separate clouds in Virginia, separate clouds in Germany. We have separate clouds for hosting our services for doing the kind of work that we do, and we need to do so. The other is considering what kind of uses of that data. So we have data that's surfaced for instructors to see what happens, who accesses their courses. That's one use. Another use is doing aggregate data analysis. So looking at anonymized, depersonalized data, as Mark mentioned, which we can't do in Europe. We just can't. It's not allowed, it's not permissible without opt-in privacy. And so we follow and we understand and follow and respect that. But it makes it quite a bit of a challenge in order to determine, to do the kind of large-scale analysis we want to do on behalf of students. So, you know, and the right to be forgotten and some of these other elements, they require advances in data sets and database structures that are very difficult to have and also challenging if you're going to have in-course analytics, right? If you say, you know, here's how you compare relative to the average of students who opted in, right? Like that's not a very good measure, right? So there are things that it creates complications. I think that we're just beginning to work through and finding ways to balance this potential value of the data with regulation and students' interest at the end. I think that's something that we're only beginning to figure out. There's very clear legal requirements, I mean, around what you should do. I've developed data policies. There's legal requirements, and then there's ethical requirements, right? There's what you must do, and then what you should do. And so we are looking through that and being very careful and cautious because regulation is catching up, right? Regulators, we have FERPA was created in the pre-digital age, right, in the US. So, I mean, Europe is moving much quicker into the digital age and considering the privacy policy.
Great, thanks very much. Shadi, would you like to share some thoughts?
Yeah, I will add some comments of Mark and John. We have already touched on many things. So we have different data centers or clouds with different places all over the world. We have some of these issues at Canada because we have clients, Canadian clients, don't want their data to leave the border. And we make sure that our data centers and our cloud will save the data to a safe place. We also do some kind of solve kind of hashing to make sure that the users that are extracting, we can't go back and know who are these users, but we still have the idea to do some kind of analytics on top of it, provide some kind of like predictive analytics or aggregating data on multiple data sets in order to not be able to come back and know who's the users. But what I'd like to focus on, especially on the new regulations about to be forgotten or to opt out, is I think what is very important in the learning analytics system is visibility. Visibility and transparency. You want to let the clients know what are the data elements that extracted. What's happening behind the learning analytics box? Which data sets, which elements are used, and why it is used, and what is the purpose, and what are the elements. And we would like to make sure that these data are visible and there is a transparency in the learning analytics, kind of metadata about the learning analytics system, in order to make sure that the client knows exactly what's going on. Adding to that, in the policy and regulations, you want to have like kinds of framework. So the data will be moved from here to here with the data governance for all the process, and shows for each one of these elements what are the data, what's going to happen with these data elements in the learning analytics. This will give trust to the organization, making sure that here's what's going on, and we know everything's going on, and as long as this is reflected in the policy and the legal terms, it will be
Good point. Thanks very much, Shadi. I have a number of questions for the three of you guys, but I want to basically ask my last question. I'm open basically for conversation with everybody else is, you work with many organizations across the world, right, in learning analytics, and I'm sure you also have plenty of experience in different types of barriers institutions are experiencing, but also we typically, as academics, see our side, why sometimes it's hard to work with different partner organizations on some of the analytics questions. But I'm sure you also have some of your insights, and basically, if you could also share some of your perspectives, what is it to make hard to partner with some higher ed institutions, and how some of these issues can potentially be overcome? John?
So to me, the working with higher ed institutions, recognizing this distinction between innovation and scalability, that to me there's a unique role for partnering with companies to scale out innovations that are invented here, right? Because in my experience, what's really exciting, what's really fun, what really drives educational institutions is innovating, is creating new kinds of knowledge and research. Replicating that is interesting, but it's also very challenging and hard to do. So I think seeing how you can partner to ensure that the work a partner does for you is something that is genuine to what you want to do, but can also be scaled out. I think that's recognizing these roles of each institution.
Good, great, thanks. Shannon?
So one of the challenges that we found is faculty engagement. So sometimes to them is you're adding more work to do, right? And the idea is what is the value that the learning analytics system will provide to the faculty in the institution. Some of the feedback that we got is how can we validate the model? How can we make sure that what you provide is right or not? So the way that we handle these kinds of engagement is we show them and get them engaged into what is the predictive modeling, how it works, what are the elements. We try to expose as much as possible the internal details of the system to the faculty in order to make sure that they are engaged. Actually, we need the faculty to be engaged before we measure the student engagement. And this is something that we found. And the whole idea is you want to show the value of the learning analytics organization and how this will save the organization from the money, from the effort, from the post, whatever, graduation rate and retention rate. The other thing is the data itself. This is one of the challenges that it will be all the way, right? We want to get the data and make sure that we extract the data and the culture as well to make sure that it's actionable.
So I think to me, one of the most powerful things that's happening right now we've seen across our client base is the learning that this is going to cause governance and organizational change, mainly because we don't have a natural home for this in most of our organizations right now, because typically the data work historically has been done by people that have been focused on reporting. They've been focused on getting reports to government agencies, to accrediting agencies, to other groups, and they're the people who have that kind of skill set. And that tends to be autopsy work, right? It tends to be kind of you're doing accountability reports. That's different than operational data and action data. And what we're seeing is that this is causing some challenges in a lot of our folks because they'll house this in IR. And the IR folks, first of all, they're overwhelmed already with reporting. And so adding this to their mix it's not their skill set, it's not what they're used to. And you're suddenly asking them to be operational with the data. They have to now go work with people and instrument new initiatives and provide data to the front lines. And here's the real problem, is if you're an accountant and you're actually preparing for an audit, the data, you have no tolerance for error. You're talking about 0.001 error. You don't want any error in the data. If you have operational data that's live and you're trying to save lives on the table, you realize every time you go to the doctor that the blood pressure is off by 7% every single time they measure it, right? There's operational noise in there sometimes. And one of the things we've got to realize is that sometimes in real-time or predictive data, it's messier data, and the people who are used to doing the auditing work aren't necessarily the people who are right for the operational and the action work. And so what we're seeing is that new organizations are standing up. Like George was just talking about University of Texas Arlington, where they've actually created a new chief data officer. And typically you're seeing one part of the organization is going to be doing reporting, the other part is going to be doing action kind of analytics. This is very similar, folks. We've all lived through this. Remember when instructional computing came in? When instructional computing really came forward about 15, 20 years ago, everybody had to figure out where to put it. And we tended to put it first in the people who were doing the other computing, which tended to be administrative computing. And what happened? The administrative computing people didn't necessarily know how to deal with faculty. They didn't know how to deal with the instructional side. So suddenly you had to figure out how you hired a separate person who was just dealing with the faculty. Then you had to figure out, did you have an IT person for administration, an IT person for this? Then you went out and tried to hire a CIO who could bring them all together. We're going to go through the same thing in analytics. I think we're going to have very focused on reporting, very focused on operational, and we're going to have to figure out the governance structure to figure out how to make this work, because action analytics and real-time analytics are different than reporting, and this is a new thing in our organizations. And we're, not to mention, by the way, you remember 15, 20 years ago, all the job descriptions at the very bottom used to have a throwaway line that said, has an understanding and appreciation of technology and education, right? That was a new requirement. Guess what's going to be coming now in the job descriptions? Has an understanding and appreciation of the use of analytics and data and education, because it's going to become kind of a new expectation to lead in the age of analytics.
Thanks very much. Any questions for our panelists? Comments? Yes, please. Can I just give you the mic, because we are having the recording.
There's a very famous cartoon in which a drunk is standing under a lamppost looking for his lost keys. You know where I'm going with this. And when asked, he said, well, of course, that's where the light is. So my serious point is there's a lot of data that students are accessing outside the institutional data. So what you're doing is clearly very valuable. I get a feeling that the outcomes will be fudged and merged because you're not taking into account other data.
That's a great question.
Anybody wants to
Sure. So, I'd answer that in two ways. I mean, the first is that we clearly need to get additional data sets in. I mean, I think including and expanding the data sets to the degree we can in compliance with regulation is very important. The second thing I'd say is that we're actually finding through data analysis that often there's very little independent variation in data sets, so that often we can use other data to indicate variation in something else. So for example, when I did my doctoral dissertation, I was really hoping that students who used more innovative things within the LMS would get better grades than students who didn't use innovative things, students who just read everything. But it turned out the students who read everything were the students who were posting, were the students who were reading the announcements, and so there was very little independent variation. So, you know, the marginal gain, to use Mark's phrase, from additional data sets sometimes, right, it's just something to be aware of. Are we looking to get the complete digital profile of the student, or are we seeking indicators and features that we can use to understand? And that's an empirical question, right, that we need to look at, we need to interrogate, we need to compare, but sometimes we don't actually need to have every single data element to get some of the insights and inferences that we think we do. That's one of the things that we're seeing.
I will say that part of this is the experimentation on what data matter, right? So, for example, we've got there's a derived variable that turns out to be very powerful in almost every institution we do. It's called degree program alignment, and we actually create a modal pathway for students through a major, and you can look at the extent to which somebody is aligned on that degree pathway is hugely predictive of risk. And those kinds of variables become learnings, right? And to get that variable, by the way, you have to combine multiple data sets. What we've been doing is testing which data sets and which institution creates that kind of value. And we've actually tested appending consumer data, we've appended census data, we've appended, and we're actually looking at micro surveys. We've actually put in grit scores and mindset scores. And by the way, the standing instruments don't seem to have a lot of value. If you get proxies for those things in the data sets out of the LMS, you get a lot more value. And then we put data on the other end where we're looking at the wage record data to figure out where they go, and we're also looking at like Burning Glass and LinkedIn and look at the job career progression. But what we're trying to find is what John was talking about was how do we help you make the most of the data you already have, right? We're not saying it's going to be perfect, but part of this innovation that we all have to do is figuring out what data matter, what really makes the data pop. When you combine these data sources together and suddenly, bam, the lights really come on. Our main product is called a Loom, and we call it a Loom because we argue the first time you turn it on is the dimmest it should ever be. right? And the idea is the more you test and the more you bring more data in, the more you learn about how to make the most of your data, it should get brighter and brighter. But you have to make sure you're being precise with it. One of my early mentors used to have this line where he said, if you torture data long enough, it will tell you what you want it to say, right? And the idea is figuring out how you don't go down that route, but you're not assuming that you have all the information, but you might as well, there's signal in there. And the idea is figuring out how to pull that signal out and make good use of it without kind of overstating it. What we do know is that students have different kinds of data that we can actually just ask them directly about in micro surveys and other kinds of ways. We just have to start getting innovative about how we pull the right kind of data in. Now, by the way, what we've learned in healthcare and other sectors is often the signal is one stage, and the next stage might be this person goes and talks to that person, and that is what needs to happen at this point, right? So it might not have anything to do with the data, it might just be a person talking to another person. That's another part of the innovation we have to pull together.
I think it's a great question. If there is learning happening outside of the learning management system, definitely. We have to use the LMS discussions. We should be having learning on Facebook, having a group there, and we're actually having learning there, right? So the way that I see this, learning analytics should not be data source, should be data source agnostic. From learning analytics system, it shouldn't care where the data set comes from. If it comes from LMS, comes from SIS, coming from Facebook, coming from whatever, and as long as it's educational data, not talking about the counting back of chips, right? So I'm talking about educational data. And these data elements should be mapped to the learning analytics somehow and capture the learning that the students have. Are we there? We are working on it. We want to make sure that the learning analytics is LMS or SIS or any kinds of data source agnostic. Because saying that we only, what we do now is because we have control over the LMS or SIS, this is what we play with because this is what we have control of. But we don't know if there's other sources that would be very useful that actually capture more learning aspects of the students outside of these systems. And to me, learning analytics should be able to capture these data sources and provide an insight to the students.
Just real quick, I think one of the things we have to think about is it's not just about mining data to find a signal, it's also about instrumenting initiatives so we have information about the effectiveness of different kinds of initiatives. So we had one of our institutions that was deeply interested in co-curricular activities and the impact on student pathways. And so one of the things it is, it sat down with our data scientists and said, how do we actually get data to figure out what co-curricular activities they go to, how do they instrument it. So what they ended up doing was, they actually charted out all the co-curricular activities for the student population and that they typically were trying to go after. They spun up an LMS instance of all of those co-curricular activities. They then created a marker for the student, whether they were a participant or a leader in that initiative, and created a learning outcome based on that initiative. And they used card swipe to determine whether the student went or didn't go to that. So they created a data trail, so they would be able to check the co-curricular activity behavior of the students as they went through that process, leveraging LMS and card swipe, which is tools they already had. The thing I loved about it is they actually sat down and thought about it before they launched the initiative, because how it typically happens in education is we launch the initiative, we do it for 2 years, and then we come to somebody on the staff and say, can you test to see whether or not that worked? And you end up having to try to recreate history before you're instrumenting. This is a different way of thinking, right, where you think about the analytics beforehand.
Awesome. Thanks very much. I think we are coming to the end of our conversation. I'd like to, okay, we can have one more quick question. Yes.
One of the questions that's come up several times in the conference also today is the potential for learning analytics to polarize student experience. So a dashboard that you're presenting to students could have a really positive impact. Some of them will have a negative impact on others. And all of you have spoken about kind of percentage rises in retention for implementations of new systems, and also some negative. I'm wondering if all of those kind of measurements are just on the average, so it's negative on average, and whether you are looking at the range of impacts of these systems on the student experience of the outcomes for individual students?
Great question.
Somebody wants to start, Shadi?
Good question. I think this is challenging. So what we found when we deal with institutions, so some institutions want to just have an instructor view or tutor view. They don't want to show the data to the students. And they want to get the data and look at it, and then they have their own intervention. And the intervention be under their discretion. But also you have feedback from other institutions that we want to show this data to the students, and they know what's going on. And I think it's, I think both of them are legit. We can do both, but the messaging has to be different, right? And the messaging, like, if you want to show a comparison between the students, this could be like one instructor view. But if you want to go to the details of each student, what they need to do, it doesn't have to be comparison. It could be kind of messaging. This is what you need you to do. We're talking on like kind of design problem. So we can provide a message that leads the student to do the right thing in order to be able to be successful. Because I will go back to Neil's, I don't know, he's not here now, in his presentation, like it is ethical as well. We know that there's some data that can help the students, and we don't want to hold it, right? So it is, we can do both, but I think what we need to make sure is it is different messaging from the instructor compared to the students.
So we're looking at it as a design problem, as Shai said, that we want to provide, wherever possible, information directly to the student, thinking that they're the best suited to take action on that. And we remove thinking about or depending on someone else in the educational chain. But that's hard. And in the X-ray product, we have no student-facing dashboards right now because we need to fully design those to make sure that they have a positive impact on students. And you're right to raise the point that it's not as if there's some homogeneous student out there, right? There's many different types of students, and you need to be cautious with that. We build analytics into our Ultra platform. We have one set of data and visualizations that go to instructors, and then for another, to students, we say, hey, we've missed you. I haven't seen you lately, right? That's not what the instructor gets, right? The instructor says, 10 students didn't show up. Here's who they are. But thinking that the instructor can then take the appropriate action. So, as much as possible, we're doing automated work around that, and we're actually researching whether that's effective or not. But then also, I think, to some degree, relying on instructors and advisors where we need to take appropriate action.
So if you haven't seen the book End of Average from Todd Rose, fantastic book, and I was just with him last week, and I had a great conversation about kind of the right way to do this, and given the fact that people do have different trajectories and they have jagged edges, right, on this idea and understanding the individual matters. By the way, we've absolutely learned that about institutions. The idea that institutions for a long time have told us they're all snowflakes, right? And the truth is they're right, they are snowflakes. They have different policies, practices, and people. They have different technology stacks, and even though they say they have the same vendor, they actually have customized it so much it's unrecognizable, even though it's the same vendor. And then they have different student populations interacting with those policies and practices against that technology stack. So that entire data journey is totally different. And then we have actually done the work. We have a student level prediction for every student at the institutions with which we work. And why that matters is, one, it gives you the ability to do propensity score matching, control groups like that. But it also gives you the ability to do student level individual feature ranking, which means if an advisor pulls up that student, you can have the specific information about that student and why the predictive model is, if they're at a certain level of risk or a certain level, it's time for a kudo, right? You're going to actually see, we actually call them intervention factors and inspiration factors. And the inspiration factors are the things that relate specifically to that student's success path, or the intervention factors are the things that relate specifically to that student. Because I think us getting precise about this matters, because there isn't, as John said, this homogeneous student. You end up kind of shooting at the average and there's nobody there, right? So the idea is us figuring out how we get to that student level with this so we can be more precise about it. It's not the easy way to do it, by the way. The easy way to do this is to create one-size-fits-all, simple variables and kind of go after it. But I think that could actually end up hurting a lot of people in the process.
Great. Well, thanks very much to our panelists. So this is our end of the official program. So let's first give a round of applause to them. So this is really the last session or the last conversation we had as part of the briefing that we organized with Q&A and the University of Edinburgh. So one last kind of announcement or a question, or more as a kind of expression of interest from your end as well, is we started here at the University of Edinburgh to work on our learning analytics policy, institutional policy, and we are trying to develop it. We also have a EU-funded project in which we are working with 4 different other institutions. And part of our thinking as well is to engage other universities in Scotland who are interested to be partners with us in this project, and also who are also thinking about learning analytics implementation, etc. Perhaps even setting up a small working group that will be sharing information, also working towards institutional policy across different higher ed institutions in Scotland. So I'm just wondering if there is some interest here. Obviously through Alison we'll try to communicate some more of that information, but I think it would be really helpful if we would have some more broader participation. Obviously the University of Edinburgh is one institution, but we would like to facilitate and help that information sharing and also broader adoption of learning analytics across entire Scotland. So that's what I had to say. Alison, did you have to say anything?
Just to thank Edinburgh again. Thank you.
Okay, and just last final announcement is basically, probably some of you had a chance already to see in the program. Civitas is organizing the executive briefing after this. Everybody is welcome to join that. We'll start about 4:30 with that session, so after a quick break, and then Mark and his team will continue with that. So thanks very much, and pleasure to have you all here.